Tyrion Lannister first heard the rumors from one of Varys's little birds. At the time, he hadn't thought much of them, fishermen's tales of a scaly beast glimpsed off the rugged coast of Cracklaw Point, or a half-drunken hedge knight's claims of seeing a winged lizard in the gloom of the Kingswood. Living in the heart of King's Landing, surrounded by walls of stone and men with suspicious eyes, Tyrion had far more immediate concerns than chasing legends. Even after his father's death and his own precarious position as Master of Coin, in name, if not in truth, word of strange new creatures occasionally made its way into the Red Keep. Most were easily dismissed as fantasies or mistakes. After all, who but the mother of dragons herself could have a dragon these days? He remembered feeling a fleeting spark of curiosity, for if there was one thing Tyrion adored, it was knowledge. He collected it the way some men collected swords or lovers, and he had always held a particular fascination with dragons. The majestic beasts of old, the winged harbingers of Targaryen power. He had devoured every account, read every musty tome, memorized the old songs. But Daenerys Targaryen was far across the sea, raising her brood in distant lands. Aside from her monstrous pets, no living creature in Westeros should have borne scales and wings. Tyrion dismissed the stories as nonsense, concluding that some fishermen had seen a large reptile, perhaps a sea serpent or an overgrown lizard, and the rumor mill had simply conjured a dragon out of it. Yes, that was it, a fisherman's fancy. But the rumors persisted. They wound their way through taverns and back alleys, dancing on the lips of whores and gamblers alike. In Flea Bottom, where gossip was the cheapest entertainment, the stories took on more macabre flourishes. Fiery footprints on the cobblestones, half-burned corpses of stray cats, an entire pig stolen from a butcher's stall in the dead of night. Ridiculous, Tyrion told himself. Flea Bottom thrived on tall tales, especially if those tales provided a momentary escape from real horrors, taxes, hunger, the cold indifference of the crown. Still, curiosity was a demanding mistress, and Tyrion had never been able to ignore its call for long. Months slipped by, the savage politics of the Red Keep swirling around him. His sister, Queen Regent Cersei, was always at odds with him, searching for ways to undermine his influence. The Iron Throne tottered under the strain of debts, rebellions, and the uncertain maturity of King Tommen. Varys vanished, reappeared, whispered secrets, vanished again. Around and around it went, a game that threatened to devour him if he failed to remain vigilant. But even that swirling chaos could not fully quench the flicker of intrigue within him. A small part of his mind kept returning to those rumors of a hidden creature, of a living curiosity that might be lurking just beyond the city walls. He found himself on the cusp of leaving King's Landing more than once. The politics were too precarious, his father's seat too large, his sister's scorn too potent. How easy would it be to slip away on a ship bound for Pentos or Bravos or even the far-flung Jade Sea? He could lose himself in a foreign city and live a life of relative freedom, unburdened by the scowls of lords and the demands of kings. Yet some sense of duty, twisted though it was, kept him in the capital. Or perhaps it was simply that he was not yet ready to abandon the lion's den. He had grown up among these schemers and cutthroats. The Red Keep was more home to him than Casterly Rock ever had been. So he stayed, trading barbs with Cersei, trying to manage the crown's coffers, fending off the contempt of courtiers who saw him as an imp too clever for his own good. All that changed on the night he ventured into the city in disguise. He liked to slip out sometimes, especially when the walls pressed too close or when the weight of every judging stare grew unbearable. Tyrion would dress in plain clothes, drab and common, and make his way into Flea Bottom or to the narrow twisting alleys near the Hook. He'd find some small tavern and nurse a tankard of ale, delighting in the relative anonymity that the darkness provided. His mismatched eyes still drew notice, of course, and passers-by might gawk at the sight of a dwarf wandering alone. But few recognized him as the infamous Tyrion Lannister, especially if he kept his hood drawn. All dwarfs looked alike to some, or so he had discovered. That night, the inn was called the Salty Doe, its sign a rusted piece of tin hammered with the image of a doe's head. It reeked of fish and old sweat, and the ale was tepid at best, but it was quiet. And Tyrion wanted quiet. He'd settled into a corner, ignoring the curious glances of the patrons. A few men stood at the bar, casting dice to determine who would pay. An old woman in the corner spat out a tooth between curses. The innkeeper, a barrel-shaped man with a lazy eye, occasionally looked Tyrion's way as if expecting trouble. But trouble was the last thing Tyrion sought that night. He sipped ale, half watching the meager lamplight dance across the table, and let his mind drift. It had been a trying day in the Red Keep. Cersei had decided to reorganize the City Watch, installing men loyal only to her, and had done so without consulting him or the king's small council. The Master-at-Arms had taken ill, muttering about some foul curse. Reports of Sel's-words gathering in the Stormlands were piling up, each more alarming than the last. And through it all, Tyrion felt an itch at the back of his mind, an instinct that told him something critical was changing beneath the surface. He might have sat there all night, lost in his own head, if the door hadn't swung open. A man stumbled in, reeking of sweat and sea brine, face smeared with grime. He wore ragged clothes and carried a battered sword at his hip. His gaze flitted around the room until it landed on Tyrion. The dwarf tried to ignore him, but the man lurched forward, collapsing onto a stool at Tyrion's table. He smelled of salt and desperation, as if he'd been drifting on a raft for days. You're a lord, aren't you?" the man rasped. He squinted, trying to peer under Tyrion's hood. Tyrion made no move to confirm or deny it, but his silence was confirmation enough. "I've come from the Stepstones," the man continued. "From Tarth. From all over, really. Heard something strange, thought maybe a lord would pay to know it." Tyrion let out a small sigh, half expecting some outlandish story about hidden gold or smugglers. "I do so love strange tidings," he said dryly, deciding on a whim to indulge the man. "Enlighten me." The ragged man swallowed hard, eyes darting around as if he feared eavesdroppers. "A dragon," he whispered, leaning in close. His breath stank of garlic and stale beer. "A baby dragon. In the forests near Rosby, they say. A local huntsman saw it picking at a deer carcass. Half the deer was scorched." Tyrion felt his heart skip a beat. More stories. More nonsense. But the specificity pricked at his skepticism. "How do you know this huntsman? And how do you know he wasn't lying? Or imagining a large bird?" The man shook his head vigorously. "Swears on his life. Burned half the deer, my lord. He was sober as a septon, too. Even showed me a scale he pried off the ground. Small as my thumb, black as night. I'd never seen a lizard scale that color." Suspicion warred with intrigue in Tyrion's mind. If someone had planted this rumor, if it were an elaborate ruse, to what end? "And you decided to risk your life stumbling into King's Landing to share this with me? Why?" The man's gaze fell to the tabletop and he fiddled with a loose splinter of wood. "Because if it's true, if there's a dragon out there, someone's going to want that news. Maybe the queen, or maybe the master of whispers, or the master of coin. Someone. And they might pay me silver or gold if I'm lucky. Enough to leave this wretched city forever." Tyrion studied the man in silence, reading desperation in every line of his weathered face. He could be lying, but if so, he was a remarkably good actor. "What's your name?" Tyrion asked quietly. "Cress. Just Cress. I was a fisherman once out of Duskendale." "Very well, Cress. You have my attention." Tyrion fished out a silver stag from his purse, flicking it onto the table. The man's eyes widened, but he made no move to snatch it yet. "Tell me everything. Every detail you recall from that huntsman's tale, and if I find your story worth the coin, you may keep that stag, and perhaps more." Cress told him everything. The huntsman had been a local, a man from the small hamlet near Rosby. He'd ventured into the forest one dawn to set snares for rabbits when he stumbled on the half-burned carcass of a deer. A small black creature with wings crouched there, tearing at flesh with razor teeth. Startled, the huntsman backed away. The creature hissed, belching a flicker of flame that singed the nearby grass. Terrified, the man ran. Later, he returned with a neighbor, but the thing was gone, leaving only scorch marks and droppings that steamed in the morning air. He found a single black scale wedged in the charred earth. The huntsman had shown it to Cress in exchange for a cup of ale and a promise of secrecy. "And he's not told anyone else?" Tyrion asked. Cress shrugged. "I can't say for certain, but he's a cautious sort. Doesn't want the local lord or knights to think him mad. He's also worried he might be accused of dabbling in black magic." He paused, voice dropping. "Word is, he's too frightened to go back into those woods." Tyrion allowed a moment's silence to pass, considering. If the rumor was true, it was monumental. Another dragon in Westeros, beyond Daenerys's brood, could shift the balance of power. If the rumor was false, it was a cunning trap or a fool's tale. But Tyrion knew that being well-informed was half the battle in this game. Knowledge was worth a few silver stags at least. He placed 2 more silver coins on the table. "Take these," he said quietly, "and forget you ever saw me. If your huntsman friend shares more interesting details, I'll be interested. But don't go squawking to Cersei or any of her cronies, or you might find yourself at the wrong end of a blade. Understood?" Cress nodded fervently, scooping up the coins with trembling fingers. "Thank you, my lord. Thank you." Tyrion finished his ale, his mind ablaze with possibilities. He left the inn not long after, hood drawn, footsteps light. The city smelled of sewage and stale sweat, but beneath it all, the faint aroma of wood smoke drifted from the night's last hearth fires. He couldn't shake the notion that something extraordinary was happening just beyond his reach, and a small, irrepressible hope flickered in his chest that in the darkness of the Rosby woods a new story was beginning, one that might, in some twisted way, set him free from the shackles of the Red Keep. It took Tyrion a fortnight to arrange his journey. He made excuses that he needed to inspect the Crown's holdings near Rosby, particularly to address certain tax irregularities. Cersei hardly cared so long as it didn't interfere with her aims. She muttered something about his meddling and demanded daily updates, but ultimately waved him away. He gathered a small retinue, a few discreet city watchguards he trusted, or at least mistrusted less than the others, a pair of servants, and a mule to carry supplies. He also asked Bronn to come along, though Bronn was reluctant. The Sellsword had grown comfortable in King's Landing, but money talked, and Tyrion promised him a handsome fee for his troubles. More importantly, he leveraged the fact that if any real threat lurked in those woods, he wanted a skilled fighter at his side. They set out at dawn. The road to Rosby was muddy in places, and the weather had turned sullen, clouds threatening rain at any moment. Tyrion rode a stout horse with a gentle gait, the only kind that accommodated his shorter legs. Bronn rode beside him, scanning the horizon with wary eyes as if expecting an ambush. The city watchguards followed, grumbling at the early hour but well paid enough to keep their complaints quiet. Tyrion found himself strangely excited, as if embarking on a grand adventure from the old stories. He reminded himself not to get his hopes up. Dragons did not simply appear out of nowhere, and the road ahead was more likely to reveal a ruse or a half-rotted carcass than anything truly miraculous. But hope is a stubborn flame. Tyrion felt it glowing in his chest all the same. They arrived in Rosby by mid-afternoon. The castle there was modest, perched on a small rise overlooking farmland and forest. Lord Giles Rosby was a sickly man, known for his persistent cough and fragile constitution. Tyrion had no great desire to announce himself at the castle. Doing so would raise all sorts of questions. But he did not intend to skulk about the region without the local lord's knowledge, lest he spark suspicions. He presented himself as the master of coin on official business, feigning concern about the taxes that were rumored to be late. Giles Rosby, pale and trembling, received Tyrion in a chilly hall that smelled of must and disuse. The lord's eyes darted nervously around, as if he feared an outbreak of plague at any moment. Tyrion assured him that he meant no harm, but simply wished to examine the region's finances and address any local matters of import. "This is a quiet place, my lord," Giles wheezed. "Nothing of import ever happens here. I assure you, our taxes will be paid." Tyrion forced a smile. "That is good news indeed. But King Tommen's small council is quite particular about verifying such matters. We also understand that there have been rumors of brigands in the woods." He leaned forward, voice mild. "Have you heard such tales?" Lord Giles coughed into a silken handkerchief. "Rumors, yes. Always rumors. There are travelers on the road, occasional thieves, nothing more. And no talk of unusual beasts?" A flicker of confusion crossed Lord Giles's face. "Beasts? Wolves, perhaps. The occasional wild dog. I've heard nothing else." Tyrion waited, but it seemed the man was telling the truth, or at least appeared to. Lord Giles was too frail and fearful to orchestrate any deception that complicated. Tyrion nodded politely and made the usual assurances of fair dealings. Within the hour, he and his retinue departed the castle, ostensibly to inspect some farmland. But once they were out of sight, Tyrion guided them onto a lesser-used path that wound deeper into the trees. He had a single lead, a huntsman named Baldric, rumored to dwell in a small hamlet a league northeast of the castle. That was the man who, Tyrion suspected, had encountered the burned deer. It was possible Baldric was the huntsman from Cress's story, or at least a close associate. The hamlet was even smaller than Tyrion had imagined, half a dozen huts clustered around a dirt clearing, a communal well at its center. Chickens pecked at the ground. A few wary faces peered out from doorways, startled by the arrival of armed men. Tyrion asked after Baldric, offering a small coin to any who would speak. An older woman emerged, wiping her hands on her apron, and nodded toward a hut with a thatched roof that looked on the verge of collapsing. "He's inside, but he won't come out for you," she warned, voice low. "He's frightened." Tyrion thanked her and dismounted, bidding the city watch to remain outside, though he gestured for Bronn to follow. Together, they approached the hut. A faint odor of stale ale wafted out. Tyrion rapped gently on the flimsy door. "Baldric? My name is Tyrion. I'd like a word." No response. Tyrion exchanged a glance with Bronn, who shrugged. The sellsword gave the door a shove and it creaked open to reveal a dim interior. A single, hunched figure sat at a table, shoulders trembling. The man, presumably Baldric, was younger than Tyrion expected, maybe 30, with unkempt hair and a gaunt face. He clutched a cup in his hands as if it were a lifeline. "Go away," Baldric mumbled. "I've nothing to say." Tyrion removed a small purse from his belt. "On the contrary, I think you have quite a bit to say. Specifically about a beast you saw in the forest." At the mention of a beast, Baldric's eyes darted up, full of fear. You heard about that?" Tyrion nodded. "I heard you found something that frightened you. Something that burned a deer." Baldric's hands trembled around the cup. He glanced at Bronn's sword, then back at Tyrion. "If you're here for the scale." "I don't have it anymore. Some peddler took it." I drank away the coin." Tyrion allowed himself a small, rueful smile. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I only want to know what you saw. Spare no detail. You'll be compensated." He reached out and placed a silver stag on the table. The faint clink made Baldric's eyes flicker with hope or greed. The huntsman swallowed. He seemed to weigh the silver and perhaps the threat implied by these armed strangers. At length he nodded. "It was early morning. I was checking my snares. I smelt something foul, like burnt hair, and I followed it. Found the carcass of a deer, half its fur singed off, the flesh still smoking. And on top of it, gods," he shuddered. "It was small, no bigger than a hound, but black and shiny with these ridges down its back. It had wings. Folded at its sides, you see, but definitely wings. And it turned to look at me with these glowing eyes. Yellow, I think. It hissed, a terrible sound. Then a spurt of flame burst from its mouth. I nearly pissed myself. I ran." Tyrion forced himself to remain calm, though excitement buzzed through his veins. "You're certain it was flame?" "As certain as I am of my own name. It burned the grass. I could smell the smoke." "And you haven't seen it since?" Baldric shook his head fervently. "Never went back, I swear. I heard it screech once, at night, maybe a few days after. But I stayed away." Tyrion reached into his purse and handed the man another silver stag. "You did well not to speak to others about this." He paused. "Except you showed the scale to a peddler?" Baldric bobbed his head, shame evident. "A traveling merchant. Gave me a few coppers. I needed the drink. Told him it was just from a strange lizard." Tyrion exhaled slowly, wishing the huntsman had kept it. But no matter. If the story was real, the scale was hardly the only piece of evidence out there. "Very well. I thank you for your time." He hesitated, then added, "One more question. Do you have any guess where it might be now?" Baldric stared at him as if he were mad. "How would I know? The forest is vast, but I saw tracks along the stream heading toward the hills. Like a lizard's footprints, but bigger. That's all I can tell you." Tyrion left a third silver stag on the table, ignoring the hungry way Baldric scooped it up. The man was clearly traumatized, possibly half-addled with fear and drink, but he didn't seem to be lying. Tyrion thanked him and departed, stepping back into the daylight. Bronn followed. "A baby dragon," Bronn said after they put some distance between themselves and the hamlet. "If it's real, it's worth more than a kingdom. People will kill for it." Tyrion nodded. "Indeed. Which is why we must proceed with discretion. If Cersei learns of this before I can unravel the truth, she'll send an army to burn these woods, or she'll publicly denounce me for chasing fantasies." Bronn grunted. "Let's just hope it doesn't decide we look tasty. A baby might be small, but it can still roast you if you're not careful." "Quite right," Tyrion said dryly. "All-th. More reason to keep our wits about us." They decided to make camp at the edge of the forest, some distance from the hamlet. The city watch guards erected tents, and Tyrion set one man to keep watch in shifts throughout the night. He doubted the rumored dragon would wander into camp, but caution was the mother of survival. He spent the evening poring over a small volume he'd brought along, an ancient text on the habits of dragons. Written centuries ago by a maester from the Citadel, it detailed the growth and feeding patterns of hatchling dragons. Tyrion's memory had retained much of it, but rereading soothed his nerves. According to the text, young dragons were particularly skittish and often hid near sources of water. They hunted small game, though if desperate, they might attempt to scavenge from larger kills. Eventually, night deepened and Tyrion settled into uneasy sleep within his tent, dreams filled with winged shapes and the mocking laughter of his father's ghost. When dawn broke, he awoke with determination. They would search the forest, try to find any sign of this elusive creature. He informed the guards that their mission was to hunt down evidence of a dangerous beast that had been killing livestock. It wasn't far from the truth, though he left out the word dragon. The men seemed uneasy but complied. They were loyal to their pockets, mostly not to the Lannister name, and Tyrion had promised a generous bonus if they found something worthwhile. They combed the woods through the morning, trudging past tangled undergrowth, crossing shallow streams, scanning for burnt patches or strange tracks. The forest was dense, and the men complained incessantly about branches scratching their arms, about the soggy ground that sucked at their boots. Bronn remained silent, keeping a sharp eye out. Tyrion did his best to remain alert despite the sweat gathering beneath his collar. The day grew warmer, the air thick with buzzing insects. By midday, they found little more than deer tracks and piles of droppings left by foxes or wolves. Morale sank, and Tyrion began to wonder if this was all a fool's errand. Then, as they were crossing a narrow stream, one of the city watch guards let out a startled cry. "Over here!" the guard shouted. The others rushed to his side. In the damp earth beside the water's edge, a patch of grass was scorched black. Tyrion slid down the bank, heart pounding, and surveyed the area. The grass looked singed, the soil beneath it dry and cracked in a circle perhaps 2 feet across. The guard poked it with a stick, revealing ashes. Could be from a campfire? One guard speculated, though he sounded uncertain. Tyrion knelt and touched the ash. It was slightly sticky, as though mixed with something else. "It doesn't smell like wood smoke," he murmured. "More like burnt hair, animal hair." Nearby, he noticed some footprints, partially washed away by the stream. They were small but oddly shaped, 3-toed with a serpentine drag between them. His excitement soared. "Bronn," he called. "Come look." The Sellsword crouched, examining the tracks. "Never seen anything like that." "A big bird, maybe? A big bird that breathes fire?" Tyrion asked with a wry smile. Bronn shrugged, conceding the point. They followed the tracks as far as they could, but the uneven ground and thick brush soon obscured them. Eventually, the trail vanished. Frustrated, Tyrion called for a short rest, handing out water and bread to the weary guards. Part of him wanted to press on immediately, but he knew exhausted men made poor searchers. While they rested, Tyrion wandered a bit further on his own, pushing past a thicket of blackberry bushes. His short stature allowed him to slip beneath the low-hanging branches more easily than a tall soldier. Thorns scratched at his face, but he pressed on, curiosity blazing. He emerged into a small clearing carpeted with moss. A gnarled willow tree leaned over a shallow pool, its reflection rippling in the sunlight. Birds sang overhead, and the forest felt still, almost enchanted. Tyrion stepped forward cautiously. That was when he heard it, a soft, wheezing growl. His blood turned to ice. Slowly, he turned his head. On the far side of the clearing, partially hidden by the drooping willow branches, lay a small shape, black scales gleaming faintly in the dappled light. It was no bigger than a large dog, perhaps the size of a mastiff, with a serpentine neck and tail. 2 folded wings pressed against its sides, and as Tyrion watched, it shifted painfully. He noticed raw wounds along its flank, as if it had tangled with something bigger and barely escaped. His heart hammered. A living dragon. Right there. It was alone, wounded, and more vulnerable than any dragon he'd ever dared imagine seeing up close. Tyrion forced himself to remain calm. He recalled from the texts that dragons, even young ones, were dangerous when cornered, prone to lash out. Flames could erupt from its maw at any hint of threat. And yet, he could not bring himself to turn away. An odd tenderness welled up in him, fueled by a lifetime of being the outcast, the misfit, the one who never quite belonged. This creature, in its wounded state, was an outsider in a world that would undoubtedly fear it, hunt it, or exploit it. He took a careful step forward, hands raised to show he was no threat. The dragon hissed weakly, lifting its head. Tyrion froze. The creature's eyes were indeed a molten yellow, full of pain and suspicion. "Easy," Tyrion murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon hissed again, a feeble sound, and Tyrion saw the raw slash across its flank. Blood oozed slowly, blackish red on dark scales. Its breathing was ragged, each inhale a struggle. Something had attacked it, wolves, maybe, or a bear. Dragons were formidable predators, but a young one, alone, could still fall prey to a pack of determined animals. Or perhaps it had an encounter with knights or poachers who recognized it for what it was. Tyrion felt a rush of sympathy, a pang that caught him by surprise. He glanced back, half expecting the city watch to burst through the bushes at any moment. But no one came. He was alone with this wounded wonder. Instinct warred with reason. Reason said he should summon Bronn or the guards and secure the area. A dragon was too dangerous, too valuable. The crown might pay a fortune to capture or kill it. But another voice, quieter yet insistent, reminded Tyrion of all the times he had been caged, mocked, looked upon as a monster or a curiosity. This creature had no allies here. Even if Tyrion tried to deliver it safely to some maester or to a lord he trusted, if such a lord existed, the chance of betrayal was high. Cersei would want it, or some rival house might. The result was likely to be captivity, exploitation, or death. He thought of Daenerys Targaryen, rumored to be raising dragons across the narrow sea. Those beasts were said to be full-grown or nearly so. This young one, was it a stray egg from the same clutch? Some random miracle? The histories told of dragons wandering or nesting in hidden places long after the last Targaryen dragon was said to have perished, though such stories were always murky. One thing was certain: if word spread of this hatchling, a bloodbath would follow. Ambitious nobles would scramble to seize it, to harness the power of dragonfire for their own ends. The possibility that it might remain free seemed nearly impossible. Unless Tyrion did something about it. Slowly, he reached into his pouch and pulled out some dried meat he'd brought for the journey. The dragon watched him warily. Tyrion tore off a piece, then tossed it gently onto the moss a few feet from the creature. The dragon sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, but did not move. Tyrion took another piece and tossed it closer. Still, the creature merely watched, muscles tense. "If you can't hunt," Tyrion said softly, "you'll starve. You need strength to heal. Go on. Take it." The dragon's head lowered, uncertain. It let out a soft, plaintive growl, as though it understood Tyrion's words but refused to trust them. Tyrion remained still. And then, inch by inch, the dragon unfurled its neck and snatched the closer piece of meat, swallowing it in one gulp. Tyrion exhaled slowly, relief mingling with awe. This was madness, absolute madness. But it was also the first time he felt truly alive in months, perhaps years. The creature shuddered, as though the effort of moving had caused pain to flare. It turned its head to lick at the wound on its flank, letting out a pitiful rumble. Tyrion glanced around the clearing, weighing his next move. He couldn't tend the dragon's wounds here, not safely. The city watch might stumble upon them at any moment. He needed a plan. Could he possibly hide this creature? Transport it somewhere safe? 1,000 obstacles sprang to mind, each more daunting than the last. But Tyrion's mind was well trained to solve problems. He rose slowly, backing away so as not to startle the dragon, and returned to the campsite. The guards were still resting, though one or two looked up as he approached. Bronn arched an eyebrow. "Well, the cell's word asked." Tyrion forced a casual shrug, though his heart still thundered. "Nothing but rabbits. We should keep searching after lunch." He paused. "Actually, Bronn, could you help me with something? I thought I saw some disturbed ground that might be a clue. Better if we check it alone." Bronn narrowed his eyes but nodded, rising to follow. Tyrion led him back to the clearing, ensuring none of the guards tailed them. He pulled aside the branches to reveal the wounded dragon lying in the moss, now gnawing on the pieces of dried meat Tyrion had left. Bronn sucked in a breath, one hand instinctively going to his sword. "7 hells," he whispered. "You weren't joking. It's real." Tyrion nodded. "We have to keep this quiet. If the guards see it, word will spread. Cersei will find out. And then—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Bronn frowned. "You want to hide it? Where?" Tyrion took a steadying breath. "Far from here. I'll think of something. But first, we need to make sure it doesn't die from that wound." Bronn crouched, eyeing the dragon warily. "That gash looks bad. I'm no maester, but maybe we can clean it with water, bandage it somehow. Might be easier to put it down, though. Safer for everyone." The very thought made Tyrion's stomach churn. "No," he snapped, perhaps more sharply than he intended. "We're not killing it." A moment of silence passed, and Tyrion forced himself to lower his voice. "If you were in its position, alone, hurt, in danger, would you not want someone to show mercy?" Bronn's expression remained guarded, but Tyrion could see he was at least considering the possibility. "Fine," the cell's word said at last. "But this will complicate matters. And if it tries to roast me, I'm killing it." Tyrion managed a small smile. "Fair enough. Let's get some water, see if we can clean the wound." He paused, We'll have to be careful. Young dragons might not breathe fire as strongly as adults, but even a small flame can do damage. They spent the better part of an hour tending the dragon. Tyrion fetched water in a small bowl from the stream, and Bronn carefully poured it over the gash while Tyrion used a scrap of cloth to dab away dried blood. The dragon hissed and snapped a few times, nearly incinerating Tyrion's fingers with a hot puff of flame, but it seemed too weak to unleash a true gout of fire. Eventually, the wound looked cleaner, though far from healed. Tyrion rifled through his saddlebag and found a small jar of salve used for treating horse cuts, hoping it might stave off infection. The dragon growled low when Tyrion applied it, but made no move to bite him. Sweat dripped down Tyrion's brow by the time they finished. He sat back on his heels, astonished that the creature had allowed them to do so much without fleeing. Perhaps it understood on some instinctive level that they were helping, or perhaps it was simply too injured to run away. Still, it had devoured the rest of Tyrion's dried meat. His breathing sounded more even than before. "We can't leave it here," Tyrion muttered. "Any random hunter could stumble upon it, or it could succumb to predators." Bronn scratched at his stubble. "Let's say we get it out of here. How do we do that without the guards knowing? We've only got a couple of mules, and I doubt this thing's going to sit in a saddlebag." Tyrion sighed. "We might have to stage a ruse. Perhaps create a diversion, send the guards back to Rosby, or on a wild goose chase. You and I remain behind under the pretense of finishing some official business." Bronn shrugged. "Could work. We'll need something to carry it in, or we'll have to lead it on foot. That might be slower and riskier." The dragon, as if hearing them, lifted its head and let out a low, throaty call. Tyrion felt a surge of protectiveness. He'd often read about the bonds some Targaryens shared with their dragons, though he had never believed he might experience anything like it. Yet here he was, crouched next to a wounded hatchling, feeling an almost paternal urge to shield it from a hostile world. It was dangerous, irrational, and likely doomed to fail. But Tyrion Lannister had never been one to ignore the possibilities hidden behind the impossible. Life was a series of gambles, and the only sure thing in the world was that everything ended eventually. He turned to Bronn. "Help me find some sturdy branches and cloth. We'll fashion a makeshift litter. Then we'll come up with a reason to dismiss the guards." He met the Sellsword's eyes. "I'm trusting you in this, Bronn. If you betray me..." Bronn waved a hand dismissively. Yeah, you'll feed me to the fish or have me thrown to your pet dragon. I get it." A hint of amusement touched his lips. "The coin you're paying me better be worth it." Tyrion suppressed a grin. "I can assure you, if we manage to keep this creature alive, it might be worth far more than coin. Now, let's move quickly before they come looking for us." It took nearly all of Tyrion's considerable wit to orchestrate the ruse. He told the City Watch that they had discovered signs of a dangerous pack of wolves deeper in the forest and that he wanted them to pursue it immediately to secure the safety of local villagers. He also lied that the crown would pay extra for each wolf pelt recovered, a promise that had the men salivating. While they tramped off on this false mission, Tyrion convinced the others, 2 men left to guard him, that he and Bronn would remain near the stream to collect more evidence of the beast for the crown's records. He offered them a small bribe to keep quiet and wait at the hamlet. They readily agreed, suspecting that the Master of Coin simply wished to avoid the hard work of a wolf hunt. By the time the City Watch was out of sight, Tyrion and Bronn had the clearing to themselves. They fashioned a crude litter using 2 sturdy branches and some old blankets Bronn had in his pack. The dragon, though reluctant, allowed itself to be coaxed onto the makeshift contraption with the promise of more dried meat. Every so often it let out a hiss or puff of smoke, but it did not lash out at Tyrion with malicious intent. After seeing how starved and wounded it was, Tyrion suspected it lacked the energy to do so. "Come on, you wretched beast," Bronn muttered as they hoisted the litter. "You'd better not set me on fire." The dragon merely flicked its tail. Its eyes seemed to glimmer with wariness, but also something else, recognition, perhaps, that these 2 strange humans were its best chance. "We can't return to Rosby," Tyrion said, sweat trickling down his temple as they navigated the undergrowth. "Too many prying eyes. We'll head northeast, away from the main roads. There's a farmhouse I heard about once, abandoned after the rebellion. If it's still standing, it might serve as temporary shelter." "Abandoned because of what? Disease? Bandits?" Bronn asked, lips curled in distaste. Tyrion shrugged. "I'm not entirely sure. But it's remote enough that we might avoid notice for a time. That's all I need." They trudged through the forest, their progress slow. The dragon occasionally squirmed, forcing them to pause. The litter wasn't ideal, but it was the best they could manage. Afternoon shadows lengthened and Tyrion's arms ached from the effort. Still, he felt a strange sense of exhilaration. Beneath the weight of the litter, he was carrying a fragment of myth, a living dragon. He had no illusions that this would be easy. Even if they reached the farmhouse, how would they feed it, hide it, nurse it back to full health? And then what? The questions threatened to overwhelm him, so he focused on the next step and the next. They emerged from the thickest part of the woods as dusk settled, finding a narrow trail that wound toward higher ground. After another mile, they spotted a cluster of overgrown structures. A decaying barn, a collapsed shed, and a farmhouse with broken windows and a sagging roof. The place looked forlorn, but it was shelter. Tyrion and Bronn carried the litter inside, navigating around splintered beams and rusted nails. Dust motes danced in the last rays of sunlight. "This will have to do," Tyrion said, eyeing a relatively intact corner of the main room. Rain leaked through sections of the roof, but not everywhere. The dragon lifted its head, sniffing the air as they lowered the litter onto a patch of dry straw. It let out a low growl as though unimpressed by the accommodations. "Better than the bottom of a wolf's stomach, you ungrateful lizard," Bronn muttered. "Now what?" Tyrion knelt beside the dragon, checking the wound. It still looked angry and inflamed, but not actively bleeding. He rinsed it again with water from his flask, eliciting a hiss. "We need food, for one thing. It's likely starving." Bronn grunted. "I saw some rabbits on the way here. Give me a few hours, I might bag a couple." He paused, eyes narrowed. "You realize this dragon's going to get bigger. Much bigger. If it lives, that is. Then you'll need more than rabbits." Tyrion nodded. "I know. One problem at a time. For now, let's just keep it alive and hidden." He glanced around the dilapidated farmhouse. "There's a cellar, I believe. We can hide it there if anyone comes snooping. But it'll need fresh air, so we can't just lock it away." Bronn studied Tyrion for a moment, a rare flicker of concern in his eyes. "What's your plan, truly? You're clever, I'll grant you that, but do you really think you can hide a dragon from your sister and half the realm?" Tyrion rested a hand on the dragon's scaly flank, feeling its warmth. He thought of the throne room in King's Landing, the iron throne that had once been forged by dragonfire, the realm that had once bowed to the Targaryens because they commanded these creatures. "I don't know," he admitted. "Perhaps I'm a fool. But for once in my life, I want to do something incredible. Something that isn't about earning my family's approval or proving myself in their twisted game. Maybe this dragon and I have something in common. We're both outcasts in our own way, but we're not without potential." Bronn let out a breath, half exasperation, half resignation. "You always have a knack for turning madness into something that almost sounds sensible." He turned away. "Fine. I'll go catch us some dinner, see if I can bring back something for the lizard. Just don't get yourself roasted." Tyrion offered a wry smile. "I'll do my best." When Bronn left, Tyrion carefully tore some strips of cloth from an old blanket, forming a makeshift bandage. He spoke softly to the dragon as he worked, though he doubted it understood. Still, his voice seemed to calm it. "We need a name for you," he murmured, tying off the bandage around its flank. "I can't just call you Dragon forever, can I?" The creature blinked, tail twitching. "You're black as night, but I'll hold off on naming you after your color. Too obvious. You're small now, but you'll grow, won't you? Maybe you'll surpass Daenerys's dragons one day. If the gods are willing." As the last glow of sunset faded, the dragon curled up on the straw, breathing with a rasp that worried Tyrion. He lit a small lantern, rummaged through the farmhouse's moldy cupboards for anything usable. Most of what he found was debris, ancient pottery, or rodent droppings. The place had been abandoned for years, if not decades. He briefly wondered who had lived here, what their story was, and how they might react to see a dwarf and a dragon taking shelter within their home. Shaking off the thought, he returned to the dragon's side and watched its chest rise and fall, each breath a small victory. Outside, the crickets began their nightly chorus. When Bronn returned with 2 rabbits, freshly killed, Tyrion helped him build a small fire in a relatively safe corner of the farmhouse away from dry thatch. The sellsword skinned and spitted 1 rabbit, seasoning it with a pinch of salt from his pack. The other rabbit he placed raw before the dragon. Instantly, the hatchling stirred, sniffing, and sank its teeth into the meat. Even in its weakened state, the dragon devoured the rabbit with frightening efficiency. Tyrion felt both awe and a pang of caution. This was no pet but a predator, one that would only become more dangerous. Night deepened and Tyrion lay awake on the straw, the dragon curled not far from him, emanating a steady warmth. He wondered if dragons slept with one eye open, if it might incinerate him in his slumber by accident. But exhaustion pressed down and eventually he drifted into a fitful sleep. Dreams enveloped him, full of bright flames and shadows of Tywin Lannister's stern gaze and Shay's mocking laughter. He dreamt of standing atop the Red Keep with a dragon perched behind him, its roar echoing across King's Landing. The people in the streets below shouted his name, some in fear, some in awe. He woke with a start to find dawn's light creeping through the broken windows, illuminating motes of dust. The dragon was awake too, lying still but watching him with those golden eyes. Tyrion pushed himself upright, feeling stiff. The creature's wound looked marginally better, or at least it smelled less infected. A good sign, he hoped. Bronn was already up, standing near the doorway that led outside, scanning the horizon. No sign of your city watch cronies, he announced. We might have a day or two before they get bored of hunting imaginary wolves and come back. Tyrion rubbed sleep from his eyes. That gives us some time to prepare. I need to think about the next steps. He knew they couldn't stay in that farmhouse indefinitely. Supplies would run low and eventually someone would stumble across them. Could he bribe local villagers to bring him meat? But rumors would spread and soon enough it would reach the ears of the local lord, or worse, Cersei. They needed a more remote hiding place, perhaps a cave or a secure holdfast. But traveling with a dragon in tow was far from subtle. He considered sending word to someone outside the crown's reach. But who would that be? Varys had vanished to parts unknown. Jaime was in the Riverlands, or so rumors claimed. Tyrion had few true allies in Westeros. Perhaps the only real possibility was to smuggle the dragon out of the Seven Kingdoms entirely, take it across the narrow sea where Daenerys Targaryen resided. Yet that was a journey fraught with peril. Tyrion wondered how the Mother of Dragons would react if he brought her a stray hatchling. Would she be grateful? Suspicious? Would she see Tyrion as an ally, or just another Lannister to be burned? Thoughts swirled in his mind, but for the moment all he could do was care for the dragon and hope circumstances aligned. He spent the morning gathering fresh water from a nearby stream, washing the dragon's wound again, feeding it scraps from the second rabbit. Its appetite was ravenous. Bronn went hunting again, grumbling about the inconvenience of feeding a fire-breathing cat, as he called it. But Tyrion sensed that the Sellsword found it all rather fascinating too, though he'd never admit it. As the day wore on, Tyrion carefully examined the dragon for any signs of new injury or disease. He was no maester, but he had read enough to know that dragons were susceptible to certain ailments in captivity. This one, however, seemed strong, aside from its wound. Its scales gleamed in the sunlight, ridges along its spine hinting at future grandeur. When Tyrion reached out slowly, it allowed him to touch the side of its neck, the scales warm and surprisingly smooth. A thrill shot through him. This was no mere beast, it was history given flesh and wings. Late that afternoon, while Tyrion was outside gathering kindling, he heard the sound of approaching hooves. Instantly, his heart leapt to his throat. He looked to Bronn, who was concealed in the barn's shadow, bow in hand. Tyrion ducked behind a half-collapsed wall, peering around to see who came calling. A lone rider appeared at the edge of the clearing, one of the city watchguards from Rosby. The man reined in his horse, scanning the area. "My lord," he called. "My lord Tyrion?" Tyrion cursed under his breath. So they hadn't been fooled for long. He took a deep breath, then emerged from behind the wall, forcing a smile. "Yes, over here." The guard's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the abandoned farm. "What are you doing out here, my lord?" "I could ask you the same," Tyrion said, infusing his tone with mild annoyance. "I left orders for you all to pursue the wolves. Did you find any?" The guard hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. "We tracked some paw prints but lost them in the rocky ground. The others are still searching, but I came to find you. Lord Rosby arrived this morning at the hamlet demanding to speak with you. He's concerned about your safety." Tyrion sighed theatrically. "Concerned about my safety? How touching." "Very well, inform Lord Rosby that I'm perfectly fine. I'll return when I've completed my inspection. You may tell him to be patient." The guard shifted in his saddle. "He was quite insistent, my lord, said something about not wanting to incur Queen Cersei's wrath if anything should happen to you on his lands. That was indeed a real concern. If Tyrion vanished, Cersei might well take it out on the local lords. I understand. Give me a bit of time to finish here, and I'll return by nightfall tomorrow at the latest." He offered a conciliatory smile. "Also, your dedication is noted. You'll be rewarded for your diligence, have no fear." The guard's expression brightened at the mention of a reward. "Thank you, my lord. Shall I assist you in your tasks here?" "No," Tyrion said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "I'm taking measurements of some old farmland. Nothing that requires an armed escort. Go on back to Lord Rosby, reassure him that I'm well." "That's an order." The guard hesitated, but Tyrion's imperious tone and the promise of a reward were enough. "Very well, my lord. I'll relay your message." He turned his horse, casting one last curious glance at the farmhouse before spurring his mount into a trot. Bronn emerged from the barn, bow lowered, relief written plainly on his face. "That was close." Tyrion exhaled. "Too close. We'll need to leave sooner than I planned. The more they snoop around, the greater the risk." They spent the remainder of the day in hurried deliberation. Tyrion decided they would travel by night, leading the dragon on foot, concealed beneath a large cloak or tarp if necessary. They would skirt around Rosby, avoid main roads, and make for the narrow corridor of land leading north. If luck was with them, they'd slip past any patrols unnoticed. From there, well, Tyrion still hadn't entirely worked out the next step. Perhaps find a ship on the coast that wouldn't ask too many questions, sail for Pentos, and hope they could keep a dragon hidden. It sounded insane, but staying put was not an option. As dusk fell, they prepared to set out. The dragon could walk, but it limped slightly on its hind leg, likely sprained in whatever conflict had wounded it. Tyrion draped a ragged cloak over the creature, hoping to mask its silhouette. With luck, a passing stranger would think it a mule or donkey from a distance. Even so, they'd have to remain on guard. They slipped into the woods under cover of darkness. The moon was only a sliver, providing scant light. Bronn led the way, a hand on the hilt of his sword, while Tyrion walked beside the dragon, guiding it gently around roots and stones. Now and then it let out a soft grunt or hiss, but Tyrion soothed it with murmured words and an occasional scrap of leftover meat. Each step felt fraught with tension. If they encountered a patrol or a traveling merchant, how would they explain their cargo? Yet hour by hour they pressed onward, the forest a cloak of shadows around them. Occasionally the dragon stumbled, and Tyrion had to steady it. Its wound had reopened slightly during the walk, but it didn't seem life-threatening. Despite the risk, Tyrion found himself oddly comforted by the presence of the creature beside him. He remembered how he'd once told Jon Snow that he had a certain sympathy for outcasts and bastards. Perhaps he had a similar sympathy for a stray dragon, cast adrift in a hostile land. By midnight, they neared a low ridge. Beyond it lay farmland and a smaller river crossing. Past that, a labyrinth of lesser trails that might lead them north. Tyrion paused at the top of the ridge, gazing back at the faint lights of Rosby in the distance. The city was no more than a cluster of flickers against the blackness, but somewhere beyond lay King's Landing, and all the burdens and intrigues he'd left behind. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope that he might forge a new path, one unbound by Cersei's maneuvers or the ghosts of his father's judgment. He crouched down and touched the dragon's flank. It turned its head, regarding him with glowing eyes. "We'll keep going a bit longer," Tyrion whispered. "Then find a place to rest. Stay quiet, keep that flame tucked away." "Agreed." The dragon merely blinked. Tyrion chuckled softly. "I suppose we'll work on your manners later." Bronn snorted. "One step at a time, imp." They descended the ridge, the night thick and still around them. The dragon hobbled but kept pace, occasionally lifting its wings in small, clumsy movements as if testing them. Tyrion realized it might try to fly one day, though it seemed too weak for that now. A pang of worry flashed through him. He'd have to ensure it didn't attract attention overhead. The difficulties multiplied in his mind like rabbits. But for the moment, he pushed them aside. Survival first. Everything else could wait. They traveled until exhaustion forced them to stop at a sheltered hollow near a rocky outcrop. Bronn went about securing the area while Tyrion coaxed the dragon to lie down on some makeshift bedding. It collapsed gratefully, chest heaving. Tyrion checked the wound again, applying a fresh bandage. He wondered how many times in the last few days he'd repeated that motion, an unlikely nursemaid to a legendary beast. When the dragon slept, Tyrion settled against a rock, shoulders aching, eyelids heavy. Despite the discomfort, a sense of astonishment still pulsed in his veins. He had done it, found the rumored dragon and rescued it from the brink. But this was only the beginning. Whatever fate awaited them, it would be shaped by the next steps he took. A dwarfed lion traveling with a wounded dragon, forging his own story amid the chaos of Westeros. If the bards ever learned of this tale, they might not believe it. Tyrion closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring fresh perils, new questions, but for now he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The dragon's quiet breathing filled the night air, steady as a lullaby. Tyrion drifted off, dreaming not of the Iron Throne or his sister's scorn, but of open skies and the thunderous flap of wings rising above a world that had so often tried to cast him down. They continued their journey by night, resting by day in concealed glens or abandoned huts when they could find them. Each step north felt both hopeful and precarious. They skirted farmland, bribed a solitary farmer with silver not to ask questions when he glimpsed a strange beast trailing behind them. Now and then they encountered travelers on the road but managed to avoid any direct confrontations. The dragon healed slowly, the limp lingering, but its energy returned. It devoured small game whenever Bronn or Tyrion managed to catch it, occasionally letting out a small spurt of flame that singed the bushes. On the third night of travel, they faced their biggest scare yet. A band of Sellswords, likely no more than 5, stumbled upon them while setting up camp near a copse of trees. The Sellswords spotted the shape beneath Tyrion's tarp and grew suspicious, demanding to know what they were hiding. Bronn tried to bluff, but one of the men moved closer, sword drawn. The dragon hissed from beneath the tarp, releasing a sudden gout of flame that set the Sellswords' cloak alight. Chaos erupted. Bronn lunged forward, dispatching one attacker with a quick thrust, while Tyrion scrambled behind a tree, cursing the gods. The dragon, spooked, limped away, half dragging the tarp. Another Sellsword shouted in terror at the sight of black scales and spitting fire, dropping his weapon to flee into the darkness. The fight lasted barely a minute. 2 Sellswords lay dead, 1 fled, and the remaining 2 surrendered, clearly shaken by the realization they'd picked a fight with something that breathed fire. Tyrion, breath ragged, forced himself to think quickly. He couldn't let them go if they'd seen the dragon. Word would spread. A more ruthless man might have ordered Bronn to kill them on the spot. But Tyrion's conscience twinged. Instead, he demanded their absolute silence under threat of Lannister retribution, punctuating the warning with the presence of the very real dragon. Bronn, more practical, disarmed them and found a coil of rope binding their wrists and feet. They left the Sellswords tied to a tree, still alive but helpless, with a single waterskin to prolong their survival. They'll talk if they ever get free, Bronn muttered, wiping blood from his sword. Perhaps, Tyrion said quietly, but let's hope it takes them long enough that we can vanish. No one spoke after that. The dragon's hissing eventually calmed, though Tyrion noticed its flank wound had torn open again during the scuffle. Wearily, he applied another bandage. The realization that so many close calls had already occurred gnawed at him. They couldn't continue like this indefinitely. Eventually, they would slip up or a bigger force would intercept them. Tyrion's gaze fell on the dragon's wide eyes, flickering with reflected firelight. "We need a safer haven," he whispered. They traveled a few more nights without major incident, though tension lay thick between them. The land grew hillier, the roads less traveled. Tyrion had chosen a northeasterly path that would intersect with a minor tributary of the Blackwater River, hoping to find a remote village or keep where he might arrange discreet passage. But as the days passed, he found no suitable opportunity. Sleep was scarce. Every noise in the dark set his nerves on edge. The dragon gained strength, though occasionally stretching its wings, letting out small jets of flame. If they'd had the luxury of time, Tyrion would have marveled at the creature's growth. But time was in short supply. Finally, on a moonlit night when exhaustion weighed on them heavily, they spotted an abandoned watchtower perched atop a craggy hill. The structure was ancient, likely from before the Targaryen conquest. Its walls had partially collapsed, leaving only a single tower and a few crumbling outbuildings. Tyrion and Bronn decided to investigate. If it was truly abandoned, it might serve as a temporary refuge, somewhere they could at least catch their breath. They climbed the winding path, the dragon limping behind. At the top, they found rubble and overgrown vines, but no sign of recent occupation. A broken gate led into a small courtyard filled with weeds. The tower itself stood precariously, missing half its roof. Bronn scouted inside, sword ready. Tyrion remained outside with the dragon, scanning the darkness for movement. "All clear," Bronn called after a few moments. "It's empty, though watch your step. Some of the floors have caved in." They led the dragon inside, finding a corner of the tower that still had an intact ceiling to shield them from the elements. A spiral staircase led up to a crumbling vantage point where watchmen once must have stood guard over the valley below. Now only a few stone blocks remained, precariously balanced. Tyrion carefully climbed partway, gazing at the surrounding land. In the dim moonlight, he could see rolling hills, a few glints of water, and distant forests. No torches, no villages. Nothing to indicate immediate neighbors. It was remote indeed. By the time he returned downstairs, the dragon was sniffing around the tower's interior, occasionally scratching at the stone with its claws. "You like this better than the farmhouse?" Tyrion asked quietly, though he knew the creature wouldn't answer. He turned to Bronn. Perhaps we should rest here for a while. Let the dragon recover. Let us think. Bronn nodded. We're about done in. If we keep traveling in this state, we'll walk right into the arms of some bigger danger. They settled in, clearing rubble to make space for a fire. Bronn rigged a makeshift door using some half-rotted planks to keep out prowling animals. Tyrion found an intact shelf in a side chamber, dusty but serviceable, to store what little supplies they had left. The dragon curled up in a corner, exhaling a puff of smoke. Tyrion carefully approached, examining its wound yet again. The travel had reopened it multiple times, but now that they could rest, perhaps it would finally heal. He removed the soiled bandage, cleaned the wound with fresh water, and applied the last of the salve. You know, Tyrion said softly to the dragon, back in King's Landing, there's a place called the Dragonet. Once it housed the Targaryen's dragons. But by the end, the dragons were small, stunted, as though captivity drained their power. I don't want that for you. You deserve open skies, the chance to become what you're meant to be. The creature flicked its tail, watching him with a gaze that felt strangely knowing. Tyrion offered a sad smile. Perhaps in another life, we'd both be free in our own ways. Bronn approached from behind, clearing his throat. I set some snares outside, but game looks scarce. We'll need to figure out a better food source soon. But at least we can catch some sleep. Tyrion sighed. Yes, sleep. And in the morning, or what passes for morning in this gloom, we'll plan. Maybe the free cities are our best option. Or the stepstones. He shook his head. I'm open to suggestions. Bronn shrugged, leaning against the stone wall. Wherever we go, it's a risk. Your sister's spies are everywhere. And if word spreads about a dragon in Westeros, it won't just be your sister we have to worry about. Tyrion looked at the dragon once more. The shadow of its wings fell across the tower's wall, a foreshadowing of the creature it might become. I know, he murmured. But I also know that if we do nothing, if we let the realm swallow this miracle in fear and bloodshed, we'll regret it. I've spent my life trying to prove I'm more than the imp they see. Perhaps this is my chance to do something that truly matters. Bronn said nothing, only nodded. A faint breeze whistled through the broken masonry, and outside, the moonlight silvered the crumbling stones. Tyrion realized how tired he was, how drained by days of fear and worry. Yet beneath the weariness, a stubborn spark of resolve remained. He set out to discover if the rumors of a dragon were true. He found one and saved it from a slow death. Now he was bound to it for better or worse by the chain of decisions he had made. They banked the small fire, ensuring it wouldn't spread. Tyrion spread out his cloak, prepared to use it as a blanket. The dragon watched him still, unblinking. He wondered what the creature thought, if it understood gratitude, if it recognized that Tyrion's fate was entwined with its own. Such musings drifted through Tyrion's mind as he lay down on the cold stone floor, fatigue pulling him into slumber. And so, in the ruins of an ancient watchtower, Tyrion Lannister and the wounded hatchling dragon shared a fragile sanctuary. Outside, the world turned, kingdoms plotted and warred, and the whispers of a new threat or a new savior drifted on the winds. But within those walls, a dwarf and a dragon nursed their wounds, both literal and figurative, a hoping that dawn might bring not just survival but the faint promise of a future in which they could rise above the ruin that Westeros had become. Days turned into weeks in that lonely tower. Tyrion and Bronn ventured out to hunt, scavenge, and trade discreetly at the nearest village for supplies, always watchful, always wary of curious eyes. They laid false trails, dropped misleading remarks to suggest they were no more than vagabonds or outlaws. Meanwhile, the dragon grew stronger, its limp easing until it could walk without pain. The wound on its flank finally began to knit closed, leaving a faint scar across the black scales. By the time the early autumn chill arrived, the dragon could even manage a few awkward wing flaps, stirring the dust in the courtyard. Tyrion watched those attempts with a mixture of pride and fear, knowing that a flying dragon would be far harder to conceal. But conceal it he must. The realm was too volatile, and word of a hidden dragon would spread like wildfire. Tyrion gleaned what news he could from passing travelers, rumors of unrest in the Riverlands, mutterings that Queen Cersei was consolidating power in King's Landing, a new wave of Ironborn raiders along the coast. Of his own disappearance he heard little, though he suspected the Lannisters might be searching in earnest, or perhaps they were relieved that the imp had vanished from the scene. Either way, no one came banging on the tower's gate. On a crisp morning, when the leaves on the surrounding trees were tinged with gold, Tyrion rose early and climbed the broken stairway to the top of the tower. From that vantage, he surveyed the rolling hills, the winding river in the distance. His breath formed small clouds in the cool air. For the first time in his life, he felt a measure of peace. This place was no castle, no lavish chamber of the Red Keep, but it was his, in a way, a sanctuary for him and a growing dragon that seemed, strangely, to trust him. Perhaps he was deluding himself. Perhaps the creature only recognized that Tyrion brought it food and did not threaten it. But it was enough for now. He heard the scrape of claws on stone behind him. Turning, he found the dragon had climbed the stairs, precariously balancing on the crumbling steps, wings half extended for support. It cocked its head at Tyrion, releasing a soft chuff of air. The dwarfed lion and the young dragon stood atop the ancient watchtower, bathed in the pale morning light. "Look at you," Tyrion said softly, smiling despite the chill. The dragon stepped closer, peering over the broken edge of the parapet as if curious about the view. Tyrion reached out cautiously, resting a hand on the creature's neck. The scales were warm, the ridges firm. For a moment, they simply stood there, man and dragon, gazing across a land that neither truly belonged to. Tyrion felt an unexpected bond, a sense of belonging he'd never known in all his years in King's Landing. "We'll have to leave here eventually," he murmured. "Winter's coming. I won't lie, part of me wishes we could stay forever, but that's not our fate. If only the realm were kinder, if only my sister." He trailed off, shaking his head. No. There was no point pining for what could never be. He glanced at the dragon. "But we have each other, don't we?" The dragon made a throaty rumble, whether in agreement or mere happenstance Tyrion couldn't say. Yet in that brief, still moment, as the wind rustled the golden leaves below, Tyrion Lannister felt certain that whatever trials lay ahead, whatever storms the realm might bring, he had found a small corner of wonder in this grim world. He would protect it, nurture it, and perhaps even learn something of his own worth in the process. For the first time in years, the imp dared to dream of a future shaped not by his father's scorn or his sister's schemes, but by the unbreakable bond of a lonely man and a dragon that should not exist, yet did. And in that existence lay hope. A fragile, improbable hope that, against all odds, they might carve out a new destiny far from the shadows of the Iron Throne. Tyrion woke with a start. Dawn's light was faint along the rim of the watchtower, drifting through the gaps where stones had fallen away long ago. Beside him, the dragon he'd taken to calling it Ember in his own thoughts, for the way its golden eyes glowed like the heart of a flame, still slept. Its serpentine neck was curled against its flank, wings folded neatly, a scaled cat in repose. Above, roosting near a fractured portion of the tower's second level, Bronn snored softly, stretched out in a corner with one hand resting on the hilt of his dagger. They had grown used to this arrangement over the last few weeks, Bronn lurking somewhere aloft to keep watch and get a moment's peace, Tyrion occupying the ground floor with their unusual ward, and each trying not to get devoured by the unknowns that circled them outside. He rubbed his hands together, blowing into his cupped palms to dispel the early morning chill. The wind had shifted in the night, bringing cooler air from the north. Autumn was not quite over, but a sharp tang in the breeze presaged the coming winter, a threat that loomed with increasing urgency. They would not survive a true northern cold snap in this crumbling tower, that much was certain, nor would the dragon remain hidden when hunger sharpened its needs. Already Ember's appetite had grown. On days when the hunting was poor, the frustration evident in the creature's restlessness worried Tyrion. He feared the day Ember might take to the air, truly take to it, winging off in search of something bigger to kill. He sat up on the broken stone floor and stretched his back, grimacing at the stiffness in his legs. A row of rusted iron sconces jutted from the tower walls, their purpose long forgotten. Crumbled mortar and age-worn blocks lay strewn about, forming natural little alcoves that offered meager privacy from the wind. Ember stirred, tail flicking, though still small as dragons went. Perhaps the length of a large hound, not counting the extended tail. It had grown leaner and more muscled over the last month. The once raw wound on its flank had healed into a raised scar that traced the curve of its ribs. Tyrion took that as a victory. At least the beast wouldn't bleed out in some ditch far from the eyes of maesters, who likely would have let it die anyway for fear of unleashing a monster on the realm. Monster? Tyrion inwardly scoffed. The realm was already filled with monsters of a more ordinary but equally lethal sort. Lords who arranged murders as though shuffling playing cards, knights who robbed peasants under the cover of law, sellswords who battered down small folks' doors for a loaf of bread. Compared to them, Ember seemed almost pure. Dangerous, yes, but not devious. No more cunning than any apex predator meant to hunt for survival. If the gods had any sense of justice, and Tyrion doubted it, They would prefer the honesty of claws and flame to the sly betrayal practiced by men like Littlefinger or his sister Cersei. He slid closer to Ember, seeing if the dragon would allow him to inspect the scar one more time. It raised its head, lidded eyes blinking. He inched forward slowly, unthreatening as he had done every day to accustom it to his presence. Ember let out a soft hiss but did not snap or rear back. Tyrion reached out, placing one palm lightly against the area where the wound had been. He felt a trembling exhalation beneath the scales, then the dragon's flesh tensed. There was only mild heat, the normal warmth of a living creature, not the feverish burn of infection. Reassured, Tyrion murmured the half-soothing, half-rambling words he'd been using for weeks, "All's well, all's well. Look at that, healed nicely. You're a tough little terror, aren't you?" Ember grumbled, pushing Tyrion's hand away with a flick of its head, then huffed out a tiny spurt of hot breath. Tyrion laughed softly. Yes, you are indeed a terror. My apologies." Bronn's snoring stopped, replaced by a casual groan. The Sellsword was awake. He levered himself up, dusting off his trousers. He had a fresh scratch on his cheek from the tower's rough stone floor. He rarely slept without some discomfort these days. After a jaw-cracking yawn, he sauntered down the half-intact spiral of steps. "Still in one piece, I see," he said, eyeing Tyrion's intact fingers. "Not roasted or eaten." Tyrion shrugged. "I'd like to think Ember's come to accept me as part of its pack, or at least as the fool who supplies it with rabbit." Bronn just snorted. "It's a dragon, not a dog. Speaking of rabbits, we're short on them." He made a gesture toward the battered satchel holding their provisions. "We might have enough for a day, too, if we go hungry. After that, we'll be gnawing on grass." Ember seemed to catch the tone, snapping its jaws in what Tyrion suspected was complaint. Over the weeks, they had tried all manner of small game, hares, squirrels, a few unlucky ducks Bronn shot with arrows. The dragon ate them all, though it sometimes spat out feathers. Once they'd managed to bring down a sickly wild sow, Ember had devoured it in minutes, leaving a carcass of scorched bones. Tyrion had found it both exhilarating and horrifying. Exhilarating because the dragon's power was undeniable, horrifying because it underscored how precarious their situation was. Soon, this creature would need meals far larger, and Tyrion had no illusions about how men would react if they discovered a dragon picking off their livestock. He rose with a weary sigh, brushing grit from his doublet. "I'll go with you today," he said. "We'll scour the area for game." Bronn lifted a brow. "We can't leave the beast alone." "That's exactly why we need to bring Ember with us," Tyrion replied, though a hint of doubt pulled at him. Taking a dragon outside, letting it roam, only heightened the risk of being seen. But leaving it alone in the tower all day, unfed and restless, was equally dangerous. It could easily fly off, or attempt to, or break something in a hungry rage. "If we keep to the deep woods, we're less likely to be observed," Tyrion continued. "At any rate, we can't remain cooped up, not if we want to keep our bellies from turning inside out in hunger." Bronn grimaced, but he couldn't argue the point. He paused, squinting at the pale light behind the broken tower wall. "We'll have to be quick then. And careful. If we get into a scuffle with bandits or run into some traveler, I'd rather not reveal to every passing fool that we're keeping a baby dragon on a leash." Tyrion snorted. "If Ember's out there and some fool tries to rob us, I'd wager the bigger problem is for the robber. But I take your meaning. Stealth is our watchword." They spent the next hour preparing. Tyrion rummaged through his few belongings. A worn cloak, a small belt knife more symbolic than functional, a wineskin half filled with stale ale. He'd never been much of a huntsman, but at least he could carry supplies and keep watch for danger while Bronn did the actual killing. The Sellsword fetched his battered crossbow and a quiver of bolts, along with the short sword at his hip. Ember watched all of this with a restless agitation, pacing in circles near the tower's entrance. Occasionally, it flared its wings each day. They seemed to stretch broader, their membranes darkening from the once translucent near the edges to a dusky gray. Tyrion hadn't witnessed a sustained flight yet, but glimpses of short glides gave him no small measure of awe. They set out through a gap in the outer wall of the ancient tower complex, stepping onto a narrow rocky path that wound down into a tangle of trees. The morning sun was climbing, rays filtering through branches still clinging to autumn leaves. Birds sang overhead, unaware of the apex predator now joining them in the forest. Ember hopped along behind Tyrion, an odd, reptilian gait that combined cat-like slinking with the occasional scuttle of a lizard. They tried tying a rope around its neck once, but Ember had hissed and nearly burned Tyrion's eyebrows off. So there was no leash. Instead, Tyrion had to rely on the rudimentary trust they'd built. If Ember decided to sprint off after prey, there wasn't much Tyrion could do but hope to keep up. Bronn led the way, crossbow in hand. They moved slowly, conscious of the crunch of leaves underfoot. Tyrion struggled to keep quiet, cursing the thick layer of detritus that made each step a noisy affair. Ember, for its part, did better than either of them. Dragons were natural predators, and though still young, it knew how to slink soundlessly when it wished. Now and then it would sniff the air, forked tongue darting out as though testing scents. Tyrion hoped it might prove as good at spotting prey as any trained hound. They walked for nearly half an hour without encountering much beyond a startled fox that darted away, too quick for Bronn's aim. The deeper they went, the denser the trees became, branches netted overhead in a lattice of fiery orange and muted brown leaves. A few trickles of sunlight dappled the forest floor, revealing roots and patches of moss. The air carried the damp smell of decay, that autumnal aroma of life returning to the soil. Ember's claws clicked softly on a patch of exposed stone. Tyrion kept glancing back to ensure the dragon was still with them. Each time, Ember would meet his eyes, a curious tilt of its head, as if to say, "Where else would I go?" Then Ember stiffened. Tyrion saw the ridges along its spine twitch, heard the low rumble in its throat. Bronn noticed too. He froze, crossbow half raised. Slowly, Tyrion followed the dragon's gaze. Through the thin brush, he could just make out a clearing, perhaps 20 yards ahead. The shape of an animal moved there, stocky and black. A boar, rooting around in the leaf litter. Tyrion's heart jumped. Boar could be dangerous, especially a cornered one, but it was also a bounty of meat if they brought it down. Enough to feed Ember and themselves 4 days if cured properly. Bronn narrowed his eyes. "Boar. Decent size," he whispered. "We can try to circle around, get a shot. Or we let Ember do the job." Tyrion glanced at the dragon. Ember's posture was all tension and focus, the membrane of its partially extended wings trembling with excitement. It wanted this. It wanted to hunt. Tyrion felt a swell of unease, but also a strange sense of pride, like a father urging a child to walk for the first time. "If we can bring it down together, we might avoid Ember being gored," he murmured. "One toss of those tusks could open a dragon's belly. Let's do this carefully." Bronn nodded and began to move, stepping aside to line up a shot through the trees. Tyrion placed a hand gently on Ember's flank, feeling the nervous energy coil beneath the scales. "Wait," he whispered. "Let Bronn wound it first." As if understanding, the dragon hovered in place, tail lashing back and forth, eyes fixed on the boar. Tyrion's pulse thudded in his temples, both from excitement and the faint trickle of fear that never truly left him. The boar grunted, still snuffling in the leaves, oblivious to its impending fate. Bronn exhaled, steadied the crossbow, and squeezed the trigger. The bolt whizzed through the undergrowth, striking the boar just behind the shoulder. It let out a high-pitched squeal, rearing back. At once, Ember exploded into motion, bursting through the last layer of brush in a flurry of claws and teeth. Tyrion barely had time to cry out before the dragon flung itself upon the wounded boar, latching onto its flank. Flames spurted from Ember's jaws, singing the bristles and raking the boar's hide with scorching heat. The boar squealed again, thrashing, trying to twist away. Ember snarled, releasing a second gout of flame that caught the boar's side, blackening flesh in a sudden burst of burning hair. The stench was revolting. Still, a boar did not die easily. Even wounded, it bucked wildly, slamming its back end into Ember. The dragon staggered, nearly losing its grip, and for a heart-stopping instant Tyrion thought the creature would be gored by the twisting tusks. But Ember skittered sideways, tail lashing out for balance, then sank fangs into the boar's exposed neck. Dark blood spurted. Another gout of flame scorched the beast's face, turning its squeals into a garbled death cry. Then it collapsed, limbs twitching. Silence fell, broken only by Ember's ragged breathing. Tyrion stepped forward, trembling from the sudden burst of violence. Ember crouched over the boar's body, black scales glistening with spatters of gore. The dragon's chest heaved, and a trickle of flame danced around the corners of its mouth as though it couldn't quite control the leftover heat. Bronn emerged from his vantage point, crossbow ready in case the boar had another last spasm, but it lay still. "Well," Bronn said after a beat, "that solves our supper problem." Tyrion exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Ember," he murmured, edging closer. The dragon's golden eyes were wild, adrenaline still coursing. Smoke drifted from its nostrils, and Tyrion could sense that primal intensity, the predator's thrill of the kill. Carefully, he placed a hand on Ember's shoulder, ignoring the sticky blood. "Easy. You've done well." The dragon's eyes flicked toward him, pupils narrowed to slits, but it did not snap. Slowly, the tension in its muscles began to recede. It lowered its head, jaws parting from the boar's ruined neck. The tang of roasted flesh wafted up, hot and metallic. Bronn prodded the boar with a boot to confirm it was truly dead. Satisfied, he let out a breath. That was easier than I expected. If it had run, we would have had to chase it across half the forest. Tyrion nodded, relief mingling with excitement. We'll need to butcher it quickly, then get away from here. The smell of blood and char will draw scavengers. He glanced at Ember, who was already tearing at the boar's flesh with relish, acting on the pure impulse to feed. Let it eat a bit, Tyrion added quietly. But we should take as much as we can carry back, or else this hunt is wasted for us. They spent the next hour in a messy, hurried process of harvesting the carcass. Bronn's skill with a blade and Tyrion's surprising knack for dispassionate focus. He'd witnessed plenty of gore in his life, though typically of the human kind, helped them carve the boar into manageable chunks. Ember feasted on the choicest portions, scorching and devouring them in a flurry of smoke. Tyrion tried not to let the sight turn his stomach. The stink of singed hair and seared flesh coated the back of his throat. By the time they were done, Tyrion and Bronn had packed several hefty haunches into cloth sacks, and Ember was crouched over a partially eaten rib cage, licking the bone. It would have devoured more if Tyrion hadn't gently nudged the dragon away, mindful that they needed to preserve some for later. Ember hissed, but did not resist too harshly, perhaps sated for the moment. Let's move, Bronn said, tension creeping back into his voice. Any traveler who hears that squealing or smells this butchery will come to investigate. I'd rather not explain why I'm standing here with a crossbow and a dragon at my side. They hustled away from the clearing, Ember slinking behind, licking gore off its muzzle. Tyrion prayed they wouldn't stumble into trouble on the return to the tower. The boar's blood dripped from the sacks, leaving a trail of droplets that might attract wolves or worse, but there was no help for it. At least they'd have enough food for a while, enough for Ember to gorge itself. Maybe that would buy them time to plan the next step. Because Tyrion knew they were living on borrowed days. Sooner or later, their presence in the watchtower would become impossible to disguise if it wasn't already. They made it back to the ruins by noon, the sun climbing higher, warming the cracked stones. Bronn set about salting and smoking some of the meat in the tower's courtyard, using a rudimentary rack made from broken beams. Tyrion tried to help, though his arms ached from lugging the sacks, and the persistent stench made him want to retch. Ember curled up on a patch of flat stone, dozing contentedly, belly full. Occasionally, it'd open one eye and watch Tyrion as though checking he was still there. While Bronn tended the smoking meat, Tyrion went to a corner of the tower where they kept some casks of water. He splashed his face, scrubbing off the worst of the boar's blood and the sticky sheen of sweat. As he did, his mind churned with the question that haunted him daily. Where next? They'd become accidental squatters in this watchtower for over a month, perhaps 2, and each passing day made Tyrion more keenly aware of the looming threat of discovery. The local villagers might be few and far between, but rumor traveled as swiftly as a raven once it took hold. And Cersei was no fool. If she received word of a suspicious occupant or even got wind of a rumor about a black, winged beast in the region, she would dispatch a contingent of men to investigate. That was to say nothing of the Freys, Boltons, or other houses that might see a dragon as the ultimate weapon to claim the Iron Throne for themselves. But if they ventured east, trying to reach a port along the narrow sea, they'd have to pass through more populated regions. There, it would be nearly impossible to hide Ember, who was growing more formidable and more noticeable every day. If they tried going north, they risked the chilling grip of winter. Dragons were said to prefer warmer climates. A freezing land of ice and snow might weaken Ember, hamper its growth. If they attempted to skirt along the Crownlands and cross into the Vale, they'd encounter mountains and guarded passes. The Riverlands were chaotic, full of patrols and raiders. The Stormlands might be an option, but rumors abounded that pockets of Baratheon loyalists were mustering. No, this was a puzzle indeed. Tyrion dried his face on a rag, then wandered back into the courtyard. Bronn had finished rigging a small, smoky fire beneath the meat rack. Gray tendrils curled upward, tickling the lumps of boar flesh with aromatic heat. A portion of the meat was already seared. Bronn had used Ember's help to quickly scorch the outer layer. Tyrion had to admit a dragon was more than a fabled beast. It was a living, breathing furnace that made certain tasks easier. We need a plan, Tyrion said abruptly. Bronn turned, wiping his hands on his breeches. A real plan, Tyrion continued, not just waiting here for the next boar or the next unlucky band of travelers we might have to silence. It's only a matter of time before someone with actual authority stumbles upon us. Bronn regarded him silently, then nodded. Agreed. But what do you propose? We can't walk into King's Landing, not with that. He jerked a thumb at Ember, who had begun to doze again, smoke curling lazily from its nostrils. We can't pass for normal travelers in any major town or city either. Tyrion pursed his lips, pacing around the courtyard. He counted the cracks in the stones underfoot. I've considered heading to the coast, he said slowly. If we can find a small cove or port, bribe a captain, someone unscrupulous, not in the crown's favor, we could secure passage across the narrow sea. The free cities might be safer. Pentos, Myr, Bravos, even Volantis. Larger, more cosmopolitan. A bribe might keep watchers from prying too closely, at least for a time. And once there, well, we'd still be fugitives, but the Targaryen name resonates more strongly in Essos. People might fear a dragon or want to exploit it, but they're not as likely to rally entire armies to exterminate us. Possibly. Bronn scratched his stubbled chin. So we become smugglers of the realm's rarest contraband, a living dragon. It's that or we wait for the headsman's block once the realm finds us out, Tyrion said wryly. You know as well as I do that Cersei would not let me keep breathing if she discovered I have something that threatens her power. And let us not forget others. Euron Greyjoy is rumored to be searching for dragons or some other monstrous advantage. If word of Ember spreads, we'll have half the armies of Westeros hunting us down. A ship across the sea is perhaps our only chance. Bronn exhaled, scanning the sky where a few ragged clouds drifted past. A fair point, though it doesn't solve how we actually get the beast onto a ship without an entire dock's worth of onlookers screaming in terror. Tyrion allowed himself a thin smile. I have ideas. They may involve barrels, illusions, and a late-night loading process. But first, we must find a place to do it. I know of a few less frequented coves to the south, near Wendwater or Massey's Hook, though that might bring us closer to major roadways. Alternatively, we can push east to Cracklaw Point, which is rumored to have smugglers aplenty, but the terrain is rough and the people are suspicious. Bronn sat down on a half-toppled stone column, tapping his foot. Cracklaw Point might be better. Fewer eyes, more coastline that's unguarded. The lords there are stubborn, but there are also a lot of hidden inlets. Perfect for illicit shipments. If we keep to the forests and avoid the main roads, we might slip through. Tyrion nodded. Yes, that was my thought as well. Let's consider that the plan, then. We wait perhaps another few days, enough to prepare the boar meat for travel and let Ember rest from the hunt, then we pack up. It'll be a hard journey, but hopefully less suicidal than trying to pass near Rosby or Duskendale. They lapsed into a thoughtful silence, the only sound the crackle of the small fire and the soft hum of flies drawn by the smell of meat. Tyrion gazed at Ember, who lay half-curled in a patch of sunlight, wings rising and falling with gentle breaths. The dragon was content for the moment. Content in a way Tyrion himself had rarely been. He found himself oddly envious of it. For all the complexities it faced in a world that would fear and hate it, Ember at least had a singular simplicity in its existence. Eat, grow, survive. Tyrion's own world was riddled with politics and betrayals, and he was half certain that even if they reached the free cities, a new web of troubles would ensnare them. But at least it was a chance for life, for possibility, something he'd felt slipping away during his last months in King's Landing. He lingered in that courtyard until evening, stoking the fire and turning the meat with Bronn. Ember eventually roused itself to nibble on some leftover scraps. By nightfall, their stash of smoked boar was respectable. Enough for a journey of a week or two, supplemented by additional hunting if fortune smiled. Tyrion took the first watch from the half-collapsed tower roof, scanning the dark horizon for any sign of lights or movement. He saw nothing beyond the silhouettes of distant hills and the faint glimmer of stars overhead. A sense of foreboding tugged at him anyway. Too many nights of worry had honed his anxiety like a blade. He told himself that soon, if they were careful, they would vanish into the forests, slip south and east, and find a smuggler's boat. From there, across the sea, they'd sail toward a new fate. By the time the moon rose high, Tyrion was yawning, so he relinquished the watch to Bronn, who grumbled good-naturedly but took his bow to the parapet anyway. Tyrion went below, curled up in his usual spot, Ember a few feet away. It was colder tonight. The wind moaned softly through the cracks in the walls. Tyrion pulled his cloak tighter, wishing they had more blankets, but the warmth emanating from Ember helped. Sometimes the dragon's body heat was enough to raise the temperature in the enclosed space a few degrees. He drifted off, half-lulled by the faint rumble of Ember's breathing, and dreamed of waves lapping against a foreign shore. They spent 3 more days at the watchtower, preparing for departure. Tyrion packed their supplies, wrapped the boar meat in cloth and stored it in sacks, kept a keen eye on Ember's behavior. The dragon seemed restless, pacing the courtyard and occasionally flapping its wings as if testing them for a proper flight. Once Tyrion found Ember perched on the outer wall, looking ready to leap off. He called out softly, coaxing it down with fresh meat. He worried that the day Ember realized it could fly more than a few feet would spell the end of secrecy. Imagine a black silhouette soaring over the forests. Anyone who saw it even at a distance would spread the tale far and wide. On the morning of the fourth day, they set out. Tyrion and Bronn, each burdened with packs stuffed with provisions, and Ember slinking ahead or behind as the mood took it. They left little behind in the tower aside from a few worthless odds and ends. Tyrion felt a pang. Oddly enough, this place had served as a refuge and he'd come to associate it with the first real sense of purpose he'd had in a long while. But it was time to move on. The world would not wait for them, nor would it spare them if they remained idle. They traveled east, cutting through dense tracts of forest. The ground was uneven, rising in gentle slopes and falling into marshy patches. More than once, Tyrion sank ankle-deep in mud, cursing as Bronn hauled him out. Ember navigated the terrain with far more grace, bounding ahead, occasionally pausing to sniff a log or investigate a scattering of mushrooms. When they needed to cross a sluggish creek, the dragon half swam, half waded, flicking water from its wings. Tyrion prayed no stray fishermen or travelers lurked nearby to see them. So far, they seemed alone in this wilderness. At night, they made small, hidden camps in hollow glades or under thick boughs. They used Ember's flames sparingly to start fires or sear what little fresh game they caught, mindful of how bright firelight could appear in the darkness. They encountered no one, though on one occasion they did hear distant voices, perhaps travelers on a road they'd chosen to avoid. Tyrion and Bronn crouched behind a screen of leaves, hearts pounding, until the voices faded. Ember, sensing their tension, remained eerily still, a shadow with golden eyes peering out from the gloom. The journey took on a dreamlike quality, each day blending into the next. Tyrion lost track of how many leagues they covered. The sun rose and set, the forest stretched on, and Ember grew more adept at chasing down rabbits or small deer. Sometimes the dragon would vanish for half an hour, reappearing with the scorched remains of a woodland creature. Tyrion shuddered at the risk. If it encountered hunters, there'd be no easy explanation. But what could he do? The dragon was a free being, not a tamed beast. He could only hope that luck kept them from crossing the wrong path. Near the end of the second week, the terrain grew rockier, and the smell of salt tang in the air signaled they were nearing the coast. Cracklaw Point was known for its labyrinth of tidal flats, cliffs, and hidden bays. Fog often drifted in off the sea, making navigation tricky. Tyrion relied on what little memory he had from reading old tomes and hearing travelers' tales in King's Landing. He and Bronn picked their way through the crags, searching for a vantage point that might overlook the shore. Finally, on a blustery afternoon with clouds scudding overhead, they emerged onto a high bluff of grassy slope, beyond which the sea stretched vast and gray under the waning sunlight. Tyrion drank in the sight. Whitecaps churned along the jagged coastline, gulls wheeling in the sky, their cries lost to the wind. The air smelled cold and briny. Ember prowled forward, claws sinking into damp earth. The dragon sniffed, letting out a curious rumble at this new environment, vast, open, loud with crashing waves. Tyrion wondered if it stirred some ancient memory in the creature's blood, for the Targaryen dragons of old had often soared over seas, bridging continents. This was Ember's first glimpse of the ocean. They followed the bluff for a short distance, scanning for anything resembling a hidden cove or inlet that might serve as a smuggling haven. The coastline was rugged, dotted with sea stacks and partially submerged rocks that could wreck a ship if one wasn't careful. Eventually, Bronn pointed out a narrow path descending the cliff face. It zigzagged down toward a small pebble beach where Tyrion could see what appeared to be a few lean-tos or huts half collapsed. Perhaps fishermen once used them. It was hard to tell from above. They made their cautious way down, loose gravel skittering under their feet. Ember clung to the rocky slope with a lizard's agility, but Tyrion's heart hammered every time his boots slipped. One misstep and he might tumble into the foaming surf far below. At last, they reached the small beach. The tide was out, revealing patches of barnacle-encrusted stones. Seaweed draped across the rocks like the hair of drowned maidens, or so Tyrion thought, remembering a half-forgotten song from his youth. A single rickety shack stood near the high tide line, its roof missing in several places. Bits of driftwood and netting lay strewn about. No footprints were visible in the wet sand. No sign of recent occupation. Bronn scouted the shack, crossbow at the ready, while Tyrion stayed back with Ember. The dragon was mesmerized by the waves, stepping close enough that foam lapped at its claws. Each time the water receded, Ember advanced, only to retreat with a startled hiss when the next wave rushed in. Tyrion found it strangely endearing. Bronn reappeared, shaking his head. No one's been here in some time. There's not much left inside. Some old fishhooks, rotted crates. Tyrion joined him, peering into the dim interior of the shack. The floor was simply hard-packed sand and pebbles. A single wooden post anchored what remained of the roof. A battered tin lantern lay on its side, rusted beyond use. Better than nothing, Tyrion sighed. We can rest here for the night, see if any ships pass by tomorrow. We need to find smugglers. People who might be persuaded to keep quiet and ferry unusual cargo. Bronn set their packs down. And how exactly do we signal them? Wave a flag that says we have a dragon, pay no mind. Tyrion smirked. Smugglers tend to know certain covert signals. A torch lit at an odd hour on a particular headland or a pattern of stones arranged in a circle. I recall some references from my father's dealings, ironically enough. Or we might simply lurk until we spot a vessel hugging the coastline. Most smugglers prefer hidden coves to official ports. Bronn leaned in the doorway, arms folded. That could take days. Are we prepared to wait? Tyrion glanced at Ember, who had now discovered a crab and was poking it, curious at how the shell scuttled sideways. We have some supplies left, plus the ability to catch more if we're resourceful. The question is if we can keep Ember from wandering off or being noticed. Still, I see little alternative. The sea is here. We just need a means to cross it. They decided to settle in for the night, clearing debris from the shack to make a crude campsite. Tyrion used what remained of the rotted crates to fashion a small fire pit ringed by stones from the beach. Ember explored outside until the sunlight began to fade, batting at gulls that flew too low, roaring in frustration when they soared away. As the shadows lengthened, the dragon returned to the shack, looking mildly offended at having been outwitted by seabirds. Night fell in earnest. Clouds covered the moon, making the world beyond their fire pit nearly as black as Ember's scales. The waves thundered, relentless. Tyrion listened to that ebb and flow, reminded of how large the world truly was and how small their corner of it, cowering here on a deserted beach with a stolen dragon. He stared into the fire, contemplating how many ways their plan might fail. If no ship appeared, or if the smugglers refused them, or if they were discovered by local fisherfolk who might run screaming to the nearest lord, there were too many variables to count. But if it succeeded, if they found a captain willing to take on the risk, if Tyrion could pay or bribe or promise enough gold once they reached Pentos or Bravos, then perhaps a new life awaited. He could conceal Ember in a private estate or remote location, nurse it to adulthood. The notion was both thrilling and terrifying. What did adulthood mean for a dragon? The Targaryen beasts of old had grown large enough to flatten armies and melt castles. Could Tyrion truly guide Ember to some safer, hidden realm without drawing all the world's wrath? He wondered, not for the first time, if he should attempt to contact Daenerys Targaryen. Word from across the sea said that she commanded 3 dragons, larger by far than Ember. But rumor was a fickle thing, and Tyrion had no direct knowledge of her whereabouts or temperament. Would she embrace another dragon as kin, or see it as a threat to her own brood? Would she accept Tyrion as an ally, or dismiss him as a Lannister not to be trusted? It was a gamble. Everything was a gamble. His eyes drifted to Ember, who lay curled near the fire, tail coiled around its hind legs. The dragon watched the flames with that half-lidded, predatory calm, like it was listening to ancient songs only it could hear. Tyrion felt a subtle pang of affection. Ridiculous though it was, in the short time he'd spent caring for Ember, tending its wounds, learning its moods, he'd grown attached. Perhaps it reminded him of himself, small, dismissed, but far fiercer than anyone guessed. He reached out, resting a hand lightly against the dragon's flank. Ember's scales were warm, the steady respiration a living lullaby in the hush of the seaside night. It was enough to let him believe, if only for a few breaths, that everything might yet be all right. They spent the next 2 days exploring the coastline, always with caution. Tyrion found a craggy promontory to the south of their shack that overlooked a broader stretch of beach. From that vantage, one could scan the horizon for sails. One afternoon, Bronn spotted a distant ship, but it sailed too far from shore to be signaled or approached. Tyrion guessed it was likely a merchant vessel, not a smuggler hugging the coast. At low tide, they discovered hidden coves and small caves carved into the cliff sides, any of which might serve as a smuggler's hideout. Ember seemed to enjoy prowling these new spaces, scratching at barnacles, splashing in tide pools, occasionally snapping up fish with a neat burst of flame. More than once, Tyrion had to intervene to stop the dragon from venturing too far or unveiling itself too obviously. The constant vigilance wore on him, but he saw no alternative. On the evening of their third day by the sea, as the sun slipped below the watery horizon in a blaze of orange and pink, Tyrion climbed the promontory for his usual scan of the waters. He carried a small spyglass, a battered relic he'd salvaged from a chest in the watchtower. Squinting through its warped lens, he scanned the waves. Gulls drifted in the dying light. The sea shimmered, stretching endlessly. Nothing. No ships, no sign of life. He sighed, lowering the glass. That was when he heard Bronn calling from below, voice tense. Tyrion, come see this. Alarm jolted him. He made his way down the uneven slope, half stumbling over loose rocks. He found Bronn on the beach, standing near the waterline. Ember was behind him, tail whipping. Bronn nodded toward the south, where the rocky beach curved out of sight. Smoke, he said simply. Tyrion peered in that direction. Indeed, a thin plume of gray smoke rose from somewhere beyond the curve of the shore. It could be anything. A campfire, a fishing camp. But that likely meant people. People meant either an opportunity or a danger. Possibly both. We should see who it is, Tyrion murmured. If they're smugglers, it could be our chance. If they're not, we need to know before they stumble on us. Bronn nodded. Should we bring the lizard? Ember let out a disgruntled hiss at lizard, as if understanding the insult. Tyrion frowned, weighing the risk. Better we keep Ember close. If it's a threat, I'd rather not leave the dragon unguarded. But we can't just waltz around a corner with a fire breather in tow. That's likely to provoke panic. In the end, they decided to investigate carefully. Tyrion and Bronn would move ahead quietly, leaving Ember behind a small outcropping of rock. The dragon seemed unhappy at being left, pacing and snorting, but Tyrion coaxed it with a chunk of dried boar. Stay here, he whispered. He doubted Ember grasped the words, but he tried to convey calm confidence. At last, with one final warning hiss, the dragon crouched behind the rocks. Tyrion prayed it would not follow. He and Bronn crept along the shoreline, using the fading light and the natural jut of rock to remain concealed. The gulls overhead screeched, but no human voices carried on the wind. As they rounded the curve of the beach, they spotted the source of the smoke. A makeshift campfire, perched above the high tide line, near a cluster of driftwood logs. Around the fire stood 3 figures in battered cloaks, their faces partially hidden by shadow. A small rowboat lay pulled ashore, half out of the water. Another figure was unloading crates from it. Tyrion's heart thumped. This looked very much like a smuggler's rendezvous. Bronn gently clapped Tyrion's shoulder. What now? Tyrion studied the group. They didn't appear to be well armed. He saw one man with a short sword at his hip, another with a dagger. The rowboat's presence suggested they might have a larger vessel anchored off the coast beyond the breakers. Or they were local fishermen running contraband. In any case, Tyrion's best chance to secure passage might be right in front of him. He licked his lips. We approach carefully, hands raised. I'll do the talking. If they turn hostile, we retreat and call Ember. Bronn shot him a sardonic grin. Call Ember, indeed. As if it's a loyal hound that obeys your whistle. All right, imp, let's see what your silver tongue can do. They climbed over the final rocky barrier and walked out into the open stretch of beach. The 3 figures by the fire jerked in alarm, turning to face them. Tyrion raised his hands in a gesture of peace, calling out, Good evening. We mean you no harm. One of the men, a tall fellow with a bushy beard, narrowed his eyes. 7 hells, who are you? He reached for his sword while another man brandished a knife. The third figure, possibly a woman by the slightness of frame, hovered uncertainly, a hood shadowing her face. The one by the boat paused with a crate in hand, watching warily. Tyrion stopped a healthy distance away, Bronn at his side, neither brandishing weapons. Travelers, Tyrion said, letting a note of weariness creep into his voice. We've been wandering the coast, seeking a ship. We saw your fire and thought perhaps you might be able to help us. One of the men snorted. Travelers, eh? Not many come this way. You lost, dwarf. Tyrion inclined his head. You might say that. But we have coin, and we can pay for safe passage to the free cities. Or at least an introduction to someone who can provide such passage. The woman stepped forward slightly. Her hood slipped back, revealing a sharp-featured face, a scar across one cheek. You seeking to flee trouble, are you? Her voice was low, skeptical. No one crosses from Cracklaw Point without reason. Bronn offered a shrug. We have our reasons. Mostly that Westeros is not to our liking anymore. He kept his tone casual, but Tyrion could tell he was ready to spring into action if needed. The bearded man hawked and spat into the sand. Fine. Suppose we might know a captain who deals in discreet cargo. But if you want information, you pay us well. We risk a beating from the local lords if they discover we're ferrying folks out of here without tax or tithe. Tyrion reached slowly into his coat, retrieving a small pouch of coins he'd carried from King's Landing. He jiggled it, letting the metal clink. "Silver stags," he said. "More if you can arrange the meeting. And we can pay in gold dragons once we're certain you're not swindling us." The group eyed each other, tension wavering. Tyrion guessed they were debating whether to simply rob him. But Bronn's calm stance and the crossbow slung over his shoulder likely gave them pause. At last, the woman with the scarred cheek nodded. "We might help. But we'll need to see what goods you can offer. And the captain we know don't come cheap." Tyrion exhaled slowly. "Of course. Let's talk terms." He inched closer to the fire, keeping his movements unthreatening. His mind raced with half-formed plans. He needed to secure safe passage, but how to also secure the secrecy around Ember. He couldn't simply say, "Oh, by the way, we're traveling with a dragon." That would either spook them or tempt them to extort him further. Perhaps he could arrange for a night departure, claiming specialized cargo that must not be seen. He'd done enough negotiations in his time as master of coin to craft a plausible story. Yet it was a balancing act, because if they became too suspicious, they might betray him to the nearest lord for a bigger reward. The presence of a dwarf, especially one who might be recognized as Tyrion Lannister, could fetch a pretty bounty in certain circles. The bearded man barked, "Don't come any closer. Toss the pouch here." Tyrion complied, lobbing the small bag so it landed near the edge of the firelight. The third man, who wore a ragged cap, stooped to pick it up, opening it to peer inside. He let out a grunt that might have been approval. "Decent coin. Might cover a meeting with the captain." "Good," Tyrion said. "Then we have a start." He forced a polite smile. "My name is Mirian, by the way, and this is my companion, Sandor." He gestured at Bronn, inventing the names on the spot. No sense giving them more real details than necessary. "We'd like to leave Westeros behind, as quietly as possible." The woman smirked. "Everyone's running from something, Mirian." She inclined her head. "I'm Alida. That's Warren." She nodded at the bearded man. "And Bewick's there with the cap. The man by the boat is Mallor." Mallor nodded stiffly, setting down his crate. Tyrion couldn't see any obvious insignia or uniform, so likely they were independent smugglers or a small-time crew. Alida pocketed the coin. "The captain won't come to shore for at least another day or two. Not until we've finished loading the cargo. You can wait here if you like, or come back tomorrow. But if you cause us trouble—" "None of us wants trouble," Tyrion said quickly. "We can make camp nearby. When your captain arrives, we'll negotiate a place on his ship. We pay well, no questions asked. Is that agreeable?" Warren, the bearded man, grunted but didn't object. Byx, rummaging through the coin pouch, looked satisfied enough for the moment. Alida nodded curtly. "Fine, but keep your distance. If we see you snooping around our supplies, we'll gut you and feed your entrails to the crabs." Bronn snorted. "Understood." They retreated a safe distance up the beach, near a large rock formation that offered some shelter from the wind. Alida and her companions resumed their business, half ignoring Tyrion and Bronn now that they'd secured payment. Tyrion stole glances, noting how the smugglers worked. Transferring crates of contraband from the rowboat to a spot above the tide line, covering them with tarps. Possibly spices or stolen goods, maybe weapons. None of it concerned Tyrion so long as they could be persuaded to bring him and Ember aboard. The bigger question, how to keep Ember a secret. He and Bronn returned to where Ember waited, huddled behind the outcropping. The dragon had curled itself in a shallow depression, tail wrapped around its body, occasionally peering toward the beach. When Tyrion approached, Ember rumbled in greeting. Tyrion scratched at the base of its neck, a soothing gesture. "It's all right," he murmured. "We found some people who might help us get on a ship." Bronn folded his arms. "So what's your plan, a wise Mirian?" Tyrion sighed, leaning against the rock. The distant firelight of the smugglers flickered, dancing across the waves. "We'll bide our time, keep Ember out of sight. When their captain arrives, I'll insist our cargo be boarded at night, claiming it's extremely valuable and we don't want prying eyes. I'll pay them enough to shut their mouths. We'll crate Ember up, or rig a large tarp around it. Perhaps a big wooden box with air holes. Not comfortable, but hopefully sufficient for a short crossing. Ember won't like it, but if we can get on the ship and stash it below decks, that might be the best chance of passing without incident. Bronn raised a skeptical brow. A crate? Have you ever tried stuffing a dragon into a crate? Tyrion managed a faint grin. I said it wouldn't be comfortable. I'll talk to Ember, calm it. We might have to sedate it with wine mixed with some herbs. Enough to keep it docile, but not enough to harm it. Bronn stared at him for a long moment, then chuckled. I suppose if anyone can talk a dragon into a box, it's you, Halfman. But remember, we only get one shot. If Ember panics and sets the ship ablaze, we'll all drown at sea. A flicker of dread uncoiled in Tyrion's stomach. He tried not to dwell on that possibility, but it was real enough. Still, he saw no other path forward. I know, he said softly. But if we do nothing, we'll be trapped in Westeros forever, and sooner or later we'll be found. This is our best chance. They made a discreet camp in a hollow near the outcropping, building only the smallest of fires for warmth. Tyrion didn't dare risk a bigger blaze that might draw the smugglers' suspicion. They slept fitfully, listening to the constant pulse of waves and the low growl of Ember whenever a gull or crab ventured too close in the night. Morning came with a damp chill, sea fog rolling in to obscure the horizon. Tyrion rose, stiff-limbed and uneasy. He peeked around the rocks to see the smugglers' campfire smoldering, the rowboat still pulled up on shore. Alida and the others appeared to be rummaging through crates, occasionally glancing at the sea. Perhaps they expected their captain's ship to appear soon. Tyrion munched on a piece of dried boar, washing it down with stale water from a flask, and planned his next steps. He would approach them again, feigning casual interest in the ship's arrival while letting slip that he had valuable cargo. But he wouldn't specify it was a living creature. Not yet. Just something that needed to stay hidden from watchful eyes. He left Bronn and Ember behind the rocks, instructing them to remain out of sight. If anything goes wrong, keep the dragon hidden, Tyrion said. No heroics. Bronn nodded. Fine. But be careful. Tyrion made his way to the smuggler's fire. The fog made the world feel close and muffled. He could barely see more than 20 yards. Alida greeted him with a guarded nod. Warren was chewing on something that smelled like dried fish, and Biax sat nearby, fiddling with a knife. Morning, Tyrion said, adopting a polite, even cheery tone. Any sign of your captain? Alida shook her head. Not yet. The seas were calm last night, so maybe today. Tyrion made a show of scanning the white haze where the water should be. I have a proposition. My cargo is delicate. I'd like to arrange for discreet loading under cover of darkness when your captain arrives. We can pay extra for that, say, another small pouch of silver or gold. Warren perked up at that, but Alida narrowed her eyes. What sort of cargo is so delicate that it can't be loaded in daylight? Tyrion offered a practiced shrug. Expensive. Easily recognized by the authorities. Let's just say it's unique. If you prefer to ask no further questions, I prefer not to answer them. Safer for both parties, no? Alida studied him, her scar pulling taut on her cheek. Tyrion met her gaze calmly, hoping she would see a man who simply didn't want trouble. At length, she jerked her chin in a grudging gesture. Fine. We don't pry. But if your cargo turns out to be something that endangers the captain or his ship, he'll throw you overboard without a second thought. Tyrion nodded solemnly. Understood. They passed the day in uneasy waiting. The fog thickened, then thinned, swirling around the coastline like a ghostly curtain. Tyrion kept Bronn and Ember concealed, only venturing out to speak with Alida's group occasionally, offering them bits of coin to keep them pliable and friendly. By mid-afternoon, the tide retreated, exposing more of the rocky beach. That was when Biax, perched on a rock, suddenly shouted, "Sail?" "I see a sail." Tyrion's stomach flipped. He hurried to the vantage point. Through the lifting fog, he could indeed make out the silhouette of a two-masted ship creeping along the coast, sails slack in the light wind. The smugglers bustled, gathering their crates. Mala rushed to the rowboat, preparing to row out once the ship dropped anchor. Alida beckoned Tyrion over. Stay here until we've spoken with the captain. Then we'll send for you to negotiate. Of course, Tyrion said, doing his best to sound calm despite the frantic thrum of his pulse. He hurried back to Bronn and Ember, who waited anxiously behind the outcropping. Ember hissed inquisitively when Tyrion appeared, as though sensing the tension. Tyrion crouched, heart racing. The ship's here, he said, voice low. They'll bring the captain ashore soon. That's our chance. Bronn adjusted the crossbow slung across his back. Let's just hope the captain is more honorable than your typical Sellsword. He just needs to be greedy, Tyrion muttered. We can work with greed. They waited as the rowboat launched, bobbing through the shallows to meet the approaching ship. Tyrion glimpsed figures aboard the deck, the shape of sails fluttering. In the swirling fog, it all looked like a half-formed dream. Time dragged. Eventually, the rowboat returned with more men. Tyrion counted at least 5 new arrivals, including one who looked older, with a salt and pepper beard and a wide-brimmed hat. This had to be the captain. Alida greeted him. They exchanged words, no doubt updating him on the contraband. Soon, Warren pointed in Tyrion's direction. Tyrion steeled himself. This was it. He motioned for Bronn to remain hidden with Ember. Then he forced his best diplomatic smile and stepped from behind the rocks. The older man in the wide-brimmed hat eyed him shrewdly, hand resting on a dagger at his belt. Alida says you want passage. Yes, Tyrion replied. I can pay well. I have cargo that needs to remain unseen. You'll find me most generous if you can accommodate that. The captain's eyes flicked over Tyrion's small stature, taking in his expensive, if travel-worn, clothes. How do I know you can pay? He asked, voice gravelly. Gold doesn't come from thin air, dwarf. Tyrion reached into his coat, producing a single gold dragon coin. He flipped it, letting the sun glint off the embossed face. In advance, he said, then slipped it back into his pocket. More upon arrival. The captain's expression didn't shift much, but Tyrion could see the calculation behind those eyes. And how large is this cargo of yours? Tyrion paused. Large enough to require a sturdy container. But it won't exceed what your hold can manage. I only need to be sure it's loaded at night, away from curious onlookers. What you don't know can't incriminate you, Captain. A wry smile tugged at the man's lips. I've dealt with delicate cargo before. I'll want 20 more gold dragons upon departure, another 50 when we land. Where are you headed? Tyrion hesitated. Braavos was the nearest free city, though Pentos might offer fewer prying eyes from the Iron Bank or certain mercenary groups. But time was short and Braavos had an advantage, more ships, more ways to disappear once they arrived. Braavos, Tyrion said. We can negotiate further if you have stops in other ports first. But Braavos is my final goal. Braavos it is, said the captain. He extended a hand. Tyrion gripped it, doing his best to project confidence despite his small, twisted fingers. The captain's grip was rough, calloused by years at sea. They call me Captain Torlin, he continued. I'll anchor offshore until after sundown, then bring the boat in to load your cargo. Make sure everything is ready by then. Tyrion exhaled relief he hadn't realized he was holding. It will be, he promised. Good, Torlin said. He gestured for Alida and the others to continue unloading crates. Now, I have business to conduct with my crew. Don't try to cheat me, dwarf. If you do, I'll cut out your tongue and feed it to the gulls. Tyrion mustered a half-smile. Understood, Captain. I'll see you at sundown. He stepped back, letting Torlin and his men go about their work. Alida offered him a curt nod, as if to say, we've held up our end. Tyrion responded with a small bow, then made his way back to Bronn and Ember. Once safely hidden, Tyrion allowed himself a moment to slump against the rocks. We have our ship, he said, voice trembling with a mix of excitement and dread. We just need to get Ember aboard without burning everyone alive. Bronn nodded, face grim. Easier said than done. Best get started on that crate or box. And the sedation, if that's still your plan. Right, Tyrion replied. I'll talk to Alida, see if they have extra wood or a large crate we can purchase. In the meantime, we'll gather herbs. I recall a sleeping draught recipe from the Red Keep's Maester, a mix of wine and dream wine with a touch of poppy. Enough to dull an Ember's senses for a few hours, hopefully not enough to kill it. Bronn arched an eyebrow. Better get the proportions right, or we'll be the cause of the realm's 4th dragon extinction. Tyrion's stomach churned at the thought. After all they had endured, losing Ember to a miscalculation would be a cruel twist of fate. He forced a steadying breath, standing up straighter. Then let's be careful. Work quickly. The tide will be in soon. By sundown, we need a plan. Every detail hammered out. And so began the frantic preparations. Tyrion rummaged through the smuggler's supplies, paying coin for an old but sturdy shipping crate. A tall, rectangular box that once held casks of salt fish. It was reeking of brine and rot, but enough scrubbing with seawater and a thorough airing helped minimize the stench. He and Bronn set it on the sand, out of sight of the main smuggler camp, and hammered in a few reinforcements using driftwood and nails Alida grudgingly sold him. Tyrion carved small holes along the top for airflow. It was cramped, but it would house Ember's body if the dragon curled up tightly. Next, Tyrion scoured the nearby cliffs for herbs that might approximate the sedatives he'd read about. He found some nightshade-like plants and a few pungent leaves that supposedly induced drowsiness when steeped in wine. Bronn contributed a small pouch of ground poppy he'd bought from a traveling hedge witch months ago. Used to ease pain or grant heavy sleep, they boiled water in a battered pot, steeping the herbs as best they could, then mixed in a measure of strong wine. The resulting brew smelled bitter enough to fell a horse. Tyrion tested a tiny drop on his tongue, wincing at the acrid taste and the near-instant numbness at the back of his throat. "Careful," Bronn warned. "We don't need you passing out." Tyrion spat, shaking off the dizziness. "I'm fine. We'll dilute it a bit more. I want Ember sluggish, not comatose." By late afternoon, everything was more or less in place. The crate stood ready, lined with some old rags to keep Ember from scraping itself on the wood. The sedative mixture cooled in a stopper jug, ready to be offered if Ember would drink it. Tyrion's nerves were strung tight as bowstrings. They could hear the smugglers bustling about, preparing to ferry more cargo out to the waiting ship. The plan was that after dark, the rowboat would return one final time to pick up Tyrion and his delicate cargo. Bronn, of course, would accompany him. The crucial question: would Ember cooperate? That evening, as twilight deepened, Tyrion and Bronn led Ember to the crate on the secluded side of the beach. The dragon eyed the box, suspicious. Tyrion had placed a chunk of roasted fish inside, hoping to lure it in. Ember approached warily, sniffing the edges of the crate. Tyrion's heart pounded. The entire plan hinged on Ember trusting him enough to enter. "That's right," Tyrion murmured, trying to keep his voice soothing. "No harm, I promise. Just a short journey." He poured some of the sedative-laced wine into a shallow bowl, placing it near Ember's snout. The dragon sniffed, recoiling at first from the pungent scent. Tyrion steadied himself. "You can do it," he coaxed. "It's just like all the times we shared wine before." Indeed, now and then he had allowed Ember to lick spilled wine, noticing the creature's half-curious reaction to the taste. Perhaps that small familiarity would help. Ember hesitated, then flicked its tongue into the liquid, curiosity triumphing over wariness. The dragon lapped at the mixture, pausing to shake its head at the bitterness. Tyrion's heart pounded. Would it drink enough? After a moment, Ember continued lapping, draining nearly half the bowl. Tyrion let out a silent sigh of relief, though dread still gnawed at him. He prayed he'd calculated the dose correctly. Too little and Ember might panic once enclosed. Too much and... He pushed the thought away. As the minutes passed, Ember's blinking grew slower, its posture drooping. The sedation was taking hold. Tyrion waited until the dragon was swaying slightly, then guided Ember toward the crate. It stepped inside, half-dazed. Tyrion quickly placed a hand on its flank, easing it down. Ember curled up, letting out a confused murmur. A pang of guilt stabbed at Tyrion. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but this is for your own safety." He gestured to Bronn, who eased the crate lid into place, then hammered nails through pre-drilled holes to secure it shut. Tyrion cringed at each bang of the hammer, worried it might jolt Ember into a panic. But the sedative seemed strong enough. They heard only a faint growl from within, followed by silence. A little whiff of smoke drifted from one of the air holes, then subsided. Bronn set the hammer aside, wiping sweat from his brow. "Done. Let's get it down to the water before I lose my nerve." Tyrion grabbed one side of the crate, Bronn the other. Even with Ember sedated, the dragon's weight made it heavy. They stumbled across the sand, letting the crate drag for short stretches when their arms gave out. The rowboat was due at any moment. The sky overhead was inky black, starless, the crash of waves near deafening. A sharp wind off the sea bit at their exposed skin. At last, they reached the agreed-upon spot, a small spit of sand near the rocky outcropping. Torchlight glimmered out on the water, bobbing as a boat drew closer. Tyrion's heart hammered. If the smugglers insisted on inspecting the crate, the game might be up. If Ember woke and roared, or unleashed flame, the plan would collapse into chaos. Everything depended on the deception holding long enough for them to get aboard the ship and stow the crate below deck. The rowboat approached, guided by 2 oarsmen. In the glow of the boat's lantern, Tyrion saw Captain Torlin perched at the bow. "You ready?" the captain barked, squinting at the crate. "We have limited time." "Yes," Tyrion said. "My cargo is fragile. Handle it carefully." His voice wavered, but he tried to project confidence. Bronn helped him hoist the crate to the edge of the boat, the oarsmen grunting as they pulled it aboard. The wood creaked ominously under the weight, but held. Tyrion and Bronn followed, climbing in awkwardly. Water sloshed around their ankles. "All right, let's go," Torlin snapped to his men, and they began rowing back toward the anchored ship. Tyrion sat next to the crate, swallowing back waves of nausea that had nothing to do with the rocking boat. Each stroke of the oars brought them closer to the unknown. He could only hope that Ember stayed asleep, that the crate remained intact, that once on the open sea, there would be no cause for the dragon to panic. The ship loomed larger as they neared. Lanterns hung from its deck rails. Tyrion spotted crew members peering over the side. Torlin had said the vessel was named the Maiden's Mist, which struck Tyrion as a rather quaint title for a smuggler's craft. He had expected something more menacing, but perhaps that was part of the subterfuge. A plain name for a covert operation. The hull was weathered but seemed sturdy, the rigging taut. A rope ladder dangled for them to climb aboard. The rowboat bumped against the ship. Crew members hurried to secure lines. Tyrion braced himself as Bronn and the oarsmen maneuvered the crate up onto a rope sling. They hoisted it with a winch on deck, the crate swinging precariously. Tyrion's breath caught in his throat, imagining Ember waking midair and thrashing. But it remained still. When at last the crate thumped onto the deck, Tyrion scrambled up the ladder, heart pounding. He arrived to see the crew lowering the crate onto a relatively open space near the mainmast. Captain Torlin stood by, arms folded. "You'll stow that below soon enough," the captain said, nodding at the crate. "Just let my men finish hauling in the rest of the cargo." His gaze flickered to Tyrion. "And let's see the rest of your payment, friend." Tyrion swallowed. "Of course." He retrieved another pouch from inside his coat, this one containing the promised gold dragons. He handed it to Torlin, who opened it, pouring several coins into his palm. The captain's eyes gleamed at the sight of real gold. Tyrion forced a polite smile. "The remainder upon safe arrival in Bravos," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Is that acceptable?" Torlin spat into the sea, then nodded grudgingly. "Aye. But if you cause trouble, or if that cargo of yours is more trouble than it's worth, I'll see you pitched over the side." "Understood." Tyrion nodded. "Perfectly." Bronn joined him on deck, scanning the surroundings. A few crew members eyed them curiously, but seemed more intent on securing lines and preparing to sail. Out in the rowboat, Alida and Warren were ferrying the last of the crates. Torlin directed his men to stow them below. Meanwhile, Tyrion and Bronn sidled over to the crate, standing guard. They could hear faint breathing from within. Ember was still out, or at least still too groggy to make noise. Tyrion wiped sweat from his brow. The first hurdle was cleared. Within the hour, all cargo was aboard, and the Maiden's Mist began to weigh anchor. Sails were unfurled, catching a gentle breeze that pushed them away from the shore. Torlin barked commands, the crew rushing to comply. Tyrion stood by the railing with Bronn, watching as the coastline receded into darkness. A swirl of contradictory emotions roiled inside him, relief at leaving Westeros behind, fear of what lay ahead, sorrow at the knowledge that he might never see certain places again. Then again, many of those places held bad memories. Perhaps it was for the best. Before long, the ship was out at sea, the surf below them a churning expanse of dark water. Fog clung to them here as well, though the wind might disperse it by morning. Torlin approached Tyrion. "Right, we're on course. You can take your cargo below deck now, but be quick about it. My men won't appreciate lugging a crate at this hour." Tyrion forced a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Captain. I'll handle it myself." He and Bronn enlisted 2 sailors to help carry the crate into the hold. Tyrion insisted on overseeing exactly where it was placed, choosing a corner far from the main walkway, partially hidden behind barrels of salted fish and crates of contraband. He paid the sailors a few silver stags for their trouble, hoping that bribery would keep them from poking about. The hold was dimly lit by a single lantern, its air stale and redolent of brine. Once the sailors left, Tyrion and Bronn carefully laid the crate down. Ember made a faint sound inside, a muted rumble, almost like a sick cat. Tyrion winced. "I'll stay with the crate tonight," he whispered to Bronn. "You can get some rest in the cabin if the captain allows." Bronn shook his head. "We'll take shifts. If that beast wakes up and starts breathing fire, we'll need to keep it calm or this ship becomes a funeral pyre." A grim truth. Tyrion nodded. "Agreed." He settled on a low crate, bracing his back against the hull, feeling the sway of the ship's motion. The lantern flickered, casting wavering shadows across Bronn's face. Above, they could hear the faint thrum of crew footsteps, the rustle of sails, and beyond that, the unending hush of the sea. They were committed now, adrift between worlds, with a sedated dragon hidden in a crate. Tyrion's mind buzzed, grappling with the enormity of it. If they reached Braavos safely, if Ember remained concealed, they might truly vanish into the sprawl of that city, forging a new life. If at any point Ember broke free or was discovered, the resulting panic could see them all drowned or worse. A half-hour later, Bronn tapped Tyrion's shoulder. "I'll keep watch first," the Sellsword said gruffly. "You try to sleep." Tyrion wanted to protest, but exhaustion weighed heavily. He offered a nod, sliding down to rest his head against the crate. The gentle rocking of the ship, combined with the emotional turmoil of the day, soon pulled him into a fitful doze. Dreams came in fragments. The Red Keep's throne room in flames, the swirl of dragon wings overhead, his sister's laughter echoing through shadowed corridors. He jerked awake more than once, heart pounding, only to find himself still in the ship's hold, Ember's crate silent. Bronn paced quietly, crossbow in hand. Gradually, Tyrion's eyes closed again, lulled by the rhythm of the waves. When he woke next, the hold was bathed in faint light from a new lantern and Bronn was nudging his arm. "Your turn," the Sellsword grunted, stifling a yawn. "All quiet so far. The beast is breathing but not stirring much." Tyrion rubbed the grit from his eyes. "How long was I asleep?" "A few hours. Dawn might be near." Tyrion stood, stretching stiff limbs. The shifting deck threatened his balance, but he steadied himself. Bronn moved to a corner, found a pile of coiled rope to use as a makeshift bed, and promptly collapsed onto it. Tyrion crouched beside the crate, listening. Ember's breaths were deep, but occasionally it gave a soft whine. Worry not at Tyrion. Could the sedation have harmed the dragon? He prayed the dosage had only caused a long sleep, nothing more sinister. He allowed his hand to hover over one of the crate's air holes. A trickle of warm air brushed his palm. "I'm here," he whispered. "Don't fret. We'll be all right." The absurdity of consoling a creature that might not even understand him struck him, but he did it anyway. In that lonely hold, with only the murmur of the sea for company, he felt closer to Ember than to any living soul in Westeros. As the minutes stretched on, Tyrion's mind wandered. He wondered what tales would be told if anyone discovered them. A dwarf Lannister, a rogue Sellsword, and a young dragon sailing to Braavos. It sounded like the start of a bawdy joke or a drunkard's tall tale. If only it remained just a story. Reality was far more perilous. Still, under all the anxiety, a flicker of hope glowed in Tyrion's chest. They had made it out of Westeros for the moment. They had taken to the sea, embarked on a path that might grant them a future. And in that future, perhaps Ember would soar free, not as a weapon of war but as a testament that miracles could survive in a world rife with cynicism and bloodshed. He sat vigil, listening to the ship's timbers groan, feeling the tilt and sway as the maiden's mist cut through the waves. Eventually, faint light filtered down the hatchway, signaling the dawn. Tyrion's eyes stung with exhaustion, but he forced himself to remain alert, always checking the crate, the air holes, the occasional hiss or rumble from within. Twice, a crewman came to fetch or store items in the hold, eyeing Tyrion with mild suspicion but saying nothing. Each time, Tyrion plastered on a faint smile and remained silent. Discretion was their only armor. At length, Bronn stirred, rubbing his face. "Morning," he muttered. "Any trouble?" Tyrion shook his head. "None so far. Ember's still asleep. Or at least quiet." Bronn stretched. "We should go above, show our faces. If we hide down here all day, the crew might get curious." "True," Tyrion admitted, "but one of us should remain to keep watch." Bronn clapped him on the shoulder. "I'll stay. You go up and speak with the captain. We don't want him poking around if he thinks we're stowing something more dangerous than gold." Tyrion almost laughed at the irony. "We are, in fact, stowing something more dangerous than gold." But he understood Bronn's meaning. He nodded. "All right. I'll see what the mood on deck is like." He climbed the ladder, emerging onto the open deck. Morning light shone through patches of fog, illuminating the tattered sails and the salt-streaked wood of the deck. Crew members bustled about, tending ropes and swabbing the planks. Captain Torlin stood near the helm, conferring with his first mate. A wiry woman with a keen expression. When Tyrion approached, Torlin glanced over. "Ah, our special passenger. Slept well." Tyrion offered a curt nod. "As well as one can on a rocking ship. May I ask how long before we reach Braavos?" Torlin shrugged. "A few days if the wind holds. Could be more if we hit rough seas." You're not in a hurry, are you? Tyrion forced a polite chuckle. I'm eager to be off these waters. But I'm at your mercy, Captain. Torlin grunted. Yes, you are. He gestured to the deck. You can move about freely, but don't get in my crew's way. And keep out of the stern cabin, that's mine. Understood, Tyrion said. He sensed no overt hostility, only the typical wariness of a smuggler dealing with a mysterious client. That was fine by him. He'd keep a low profile. He spent the morning strolling the deck, observing the crew as they navigated. The sky overhead was a dull gray, the air cold and damp. Occasionally, he peered over the railing, seeing only endless sea. A gull circled once, then vanished into the haze. For a fleeting moment, Tyrion considered the sheer enormity of what they had done, smuggling a dragon out of Westeros to a foreign land. It almost didn't seem real. But then he recalled the frantic hammering of nails in the crate, the bitter brew of herbs, the hush of embers breathing in that cramped hold. It was all too real. Around midday, a crewman ladled out bowls of a thin fish stew. Tyrion forced himself to eat, though his stomach churned with nerves. He took a bowl below deck for Bronn, who accepted it with a grunt. Still quiet, the Sellsword murmured, nodding at the crate. I'm getting worried. It's been a long time for the beast to be out. Tyrion chewed his lip. We might open it slightly, let in more fresh air. But if we do, Ember might panic or lash out. We should at least wait until nightfall when the crew is asleep. That way, if Ember thrashes or roars, fewer people will hear. Bronn nodded. Agreed. I can hold out a bit longer. Tyrion felt a wave of gratitude. Bronn rarely showed such patience, but they both knew this was their best shot at survival. Hours crawled by, the sea's monotony broken only by the occasional shout of a crewman or the creak of timbers. Tyrion returned topside, mingling just enough to avoid suspicion but not so much as to invite conversation. Captain Torlin seemed content to leave him alone so long as the promised gold was forthcoming. At sunset, the skies cleared a little, revealing streaks of orange and pink. Tyrion went back to the hold. Bronn looked exhausted, circles under his eyes, though he'd taken brief rests. Together, they listened at the crate. Ember's breathing was shallow, a faint rasp. Tyrion's heart constricted. We should open it, he said quietly. Carefully. They worked the nails loose from the lid, prying it up just enough to create a gap. A wave of stale, warm air whooshed out. Ember's form was dimly visible in the lantern glow. Curled up, head resting on its tail. The dragon's scales looked dull, a fine sheen of sweat or condensation covering them. Tyrion reached in a hand, gently stroking the creature's flank. Ember, he whispered. A low, sluggish rumble answered. Ember's eyes blinked, pupils dilated. Tyrion could feel the creature tremble as though it was weak or disoriented. Fear lanced through him. Had the sedation caused this prolonged stupor, or was there another problem? He urged Ember to shift. The dragon tried to unfurl but only managed a feeble movement. F its tail. Tyrion's stomach dropped. They had to get the creature out at least briefly or it might suffocate or starve. But how? Bringing a dragon loose in the hold of a small ship was an invitation to chaos. Tyrion whispered frantic reassurances, touching Ember's muzzle, feeling the hot breath. Ember managed a weak hiss, barely audible. We'll get you out, Tyrion promised. Just for a moment. Breathe some fresh air, have some water. Then back in you go, quietly. Bronn glanced at him. If the crew sees us. Tyrion took a shaky breath. We'll do it when most are asleep. Now. This is our only chance. The evening meal had likely concluded and the night watch would be minimal. If they were quiet, they might sneak Ember up on deck for a few minutes, let it breathe real air, then guide it back down before anyone noticed. It was madness. But letting Ember languish in that crate might be a death sentence. They waited a short while, listening for signs of activity above. The ship seemed quiet, the occasional footstep or muffled voice indicating only a skeleton crew on watch. Tyrion steeled himself. All right, he whispered. Help me loosen the crate. Bronn complied, prying away the lid fully. Ember roused, blinking in confusion at the sudden space. Tyrion offered a piece of salted meat, which the dragon sniffed half-heartedly, then took in a slow, gummy bite. Relief flickered in Tyrion's chest, at least Ember was willing to eat. Then the dragon tried to stand. Its limbs wobbled, nearly collapsing. Tyrion caught its flank, supporting it. Easy, he murmured. The sedation might still be wearing off. Bronn glanced nervously at the hatch. We need to hurry before someone comes. Together, they half-lifted, half-led Ember out of the crate. The dragon draped a wing over Tyrion's shoulders for balance, its body trembling. Its tail dragged against the floor. Tyrion's heart clenched at how vulnerable Ember looked. Nothing like the fearsome predator that had slain Boar in the forest. This way, Tyrion whispered, guiding Ember toward the ladder. But that route was impossible. Ember was too large to climb the narrow rungs unassisted, especially in this weakened state. We'll have to use the cargo ramp, Bronn hissed. The hatch where they load goods. Over there. He pointed to a broader opening toward the stern, typically used for larger cargo to be hoisted by pulley. It was closed at the moment. They carefully maneuvered Ember to that corner, trying not to knock into barrels or crates. Ember let out a soft moan, wings scraping the ceiling. Sweat beaded Tyrion's brow. If the dragon decided to breathe fire now, the entire hold could ignite. At last, they reached the cargo hatch. Bronn nudged the latch, cursing under his breath. Locked from the outside. We'll have to open it from above. Tyrion swallowed a curse. We can't bring the dragon up the ladder. Not like this. A flurry of footsteps sounded from overhead. Tyrion and Bronn froze, hearts pounding. Light poured down through a gap in the boards. Someone was passing by with a lantern. Their muffled voice drifted through the deck planks. After a moment, it faded. Tyrion exhaled shakily. Ember whimpered, smoke curling from its nostrils. The sedation had drained the dragon of its usual fight. Tyrion feared it might lash out if forced to remain cramped. Or worse, it might lose the will to struggle at all. We have to get fresh air somehow, Tyrion whispered. We can't open the main hatch or the entire crew will see. Maybe just an open porthole. Something small so Ember can get a breath of outside air. Bronn grimaced, scanning the hold. There, he said, pointing to a small ventilation port near the waterline. It was an opening used to keep air circulating in the hold, secured by a hinged wooden shutter. If they could open that, Ember might at least poke its snout outside. It wasn't the grand respite Tyrion had hoped for, but it might suffice to keep the dragon from suffocating. They guided Ember to the porthole, though the dragon staggered, half collapsing at one point. Tyrion's chest twisted with guilt. He had never meant for Ember to suffer. At last, they managed to unhook the shutter, revealing a round opening to the outside. The scent of brine and cool night air rushed in. Ember lifted its head, nostrils flaring. A low moan of relief escaped its throat, and it pressed its muzzle against the opening, inhaling the salt-laced breeze. Tyrion placed a hand on Ember's shoulder, feeling the tension slowly ease. The dragon blinked as though half-dreaming. I'm sorry, Tyrion murmured, voice thick. We'll reach Braavos soon, and then you won't have to hide in a box. Just hold on a little longer. The words felt pitifully inadequate, but it was all he could offer. Bronn kept watch, crossbow in hand, while Ember drank in the outside air, regaining a fraction of its spirit. Minutes ticked by, each one a risk that someone might come below and discover them. Tyrion kept silent, stroking Ember's scales in a gesture of comfort he wasn't sure the dragon understood. Gradually, Ember's breathing grew steadier. The sedation had left it weak, but the fresh air seemed to help clear its senses. When Ember tried to shift its weight, it managed a steadier footing. That was enough for Tyrion to consider their next move. We need to get it back in the crate, he whispered to Bronn. If we're caught with a loose dragon in the hold. Bronn nodded, but Ember let out a quiet hiss when they tried to guide it away from the porthole. Tyrion's heart clenched. I know you want to stay, he murmured, but it's not safe. Not yet. He offered another piece of salted meat, luring Ember away inch by inch. The dragon whined in protest, but followed, munching the briny morsel. Carefully, they led Ember back to the crate. With a final, miserable look at Tyrion, the dragon curled inside. Its eyes were still hazy, but it seemed slightly less distressed than before. They replaced the lid, though this time Tyrion didn't drive nails in as tightly. He left a small gap to allow better airflow, hoping the extra ventilation might prevent further suffocation. Ember shuddered, letting out a faint gust of smoke. Tyrion whispered reassurances until the dragon settled into an uneasy quiet. Bronn sank onto a barrel, tension etched across his features. Gods, that was almost a disaster. Tyrion pressed a hand against his racing heart. Yes. But we managed. We'll have to do that again tomorrow night, or Ember won't last. Bronn grimaced. If we're lucky, we'll be in Braavos by then. If the wind favors us. Tyrion glanced at the crate. Let's hope so. He felt tears sting the corners of his eyes, exhaustion and guilt crashing over him. He blinked them away, focusing on the flicker of hope in his chest. They just needed to survive a few more days. Braavos? A chance for freedom. Maybe then he could nurse Ember back to full strength, find a safer place than a cramped crate in a smuggler's hold. Tom stretched painfully. Each day was a balancing act of secrecy and necessity. Tyrion and Bronn took turns on deck, feigning normalcy while the other kept watch below. Each night, they repeated the risky routine of letting Ember breathe through the porthole, feeding it small portions of meat or fish. The sedation gradually wore off, allowing the dragon to regain some of its vigor, though it remained subdued in the cramped space. Once, in a moment of frustration, Ember unleashed a small burst of flame that blackened the interior of the crate. Tyrion had to smother the smoke before it rose through the hold. Every step was fraught with the possibility of discovery. On the third night at sea, they encountered choppy waters. Waves crashed against the hull, pitching the ship violently. Crewmen scrambled to secure rigging. Tyrion clung to the hold's support beams, feeling queasy. Ember growled, likely as disoriented as the rest of them. If the weather worsened to a full storm, the risk of water flooding the hold grew. Tyrion worried about the crate tipping over or slamming into a wall. Even Bronn looked paler than usual, cursing every time the deck lurched beneath their feet. Fortunately, by dawn, the seas calmed. Tyrion emerged topside, hoping to see land. The horizon was clear, broken only by faint shapes in the distance that might be islands or reefs. Captain Tolan claimed they would reach Bravos by midday. Tyrion's stomach twisted with anticipation. If they could just get into the city's harbor without anyone prying into their cargo. Around noon, a shout went up from the crow's nest. "Bravos ahead!" Tyrion strained his eyes. There, across the gleaming water, the silhouette of a distant Titan statue rose, the famous Titan of Bravos guarding the entrance to the lagoon. His heart soared at the sight. They had done it. They were truly at Bravos' doorstep. The city sprawled beyond, a cluster of islands connected by bridges, spires reaching into the sky. This was the legendary Free City, seat of the Iron Bank, a place of canals and secrets. Tyrion had never been so glad to see a city in all his life. Captain Tolan approached him at the rail. "We'll dock in a quieter part of the harbor," he said. "I know a berth where the officials don't look too closely. But it'll still cost you a tidy sum. And you'll offload your cargo quickly, understood?" Tyrion nodded eagerly. "Yes, of course. Thank you." He'd give the man every coin he had if it meant disembarking Ember without a riot. Once they found a spot in the labyrinth of canals, Tyrion could arrange a hidden warehouse or storehouse to stash the dragon until he found more permanent quarters. As the maiden's mist approached the Titan, its massive stone visage loomed overhead, casting a deep shadow across the deck. Tyrion suppressed a shiver. Some said the Titan's eyes could burn ships with deadly flames. An old legend, perhaps, but hauntingly apparent. All the same, he felt a surge of optimism. He'd done it. They'd fled Westeros, survived the crossing, and arrived at a city where they might carve a new path. Bravos spread out before them, a city of green waters and arching bridges, buildings perched along myriad canals. The sounds of commerce drifted across the water, ship bells, street criers, the bustle of 1,000 tongues. Tolan guided the ship into a narrower canal off the main route, navigating skillfully past other vessels. At last, they docked at a secluded wharf beside a cluster of warehouses, the water green and still in the midday sun. Tyrion rushed below to prepare Ember for disembarking. Bronn had loosened the crate's nails again, letting Ember peer through the gap. The dragon's eyes shone with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity. Tyrion gently touched its flank. "We're here," he whispered. "Just a bit longer, and you'll be free of this cramped box." They waited until the crew secured the lines and the captain signaled them to offload. Then, with hearts pounding, Tyrion and Bronn, aided by 2 burly sailors, hoisted the crate up to the deck and onto the wharf. Every jostle made Tyrion flinch. Ember let out soft growls, but no flames emerged. Once on the dock, Tyrion paid Captain Tolan the promised gold plus a small bonus to ensure his silence. The captain grinned, patting the coin purse. "A pleasure, Mirian," he said. "I hope you find what you're looking for in Bravos." Tyrion forced a laugh. "Me too, Captain. Safe travels." With that, the maiden's mist cast off, leaving Tyrion, Bronn, and a large crate containing a dragon on the deserted wharf. A few gulls squawked overhead, and somewhere beyond the warehouses, voices echoed faintly. Tyrion's pulse thudded in his ears. They were alone in a foreign city with a contraband beast that could spark chaos if discovered. Yet a giddy sense of triumph fluttered in his stomach. They had escaped Westeros. Bronn set the crate down, wiping sweat from his brow. Now what? Tyrion turned, scanning the row of warehouses. Some looked abandoned, or at least rarely used. He spotted one with boarded-up windows, a sign tacked on the door in Bravosi script that he couldn't immediately read. Perfect. We take Ember there, break in if we must, and give the dragon space to stretch. After that, we'll figure out how to survive in Bravos. We'll need bribes, false identities, a place to hide. But at least for tonight, we can rest and Ember can breathe. Bronn grunted. Better hope it doesn't set the warehouse on fire. A faint smile tugged at Tyrion's lips. We'll keep it calm. One step at a time. They carried the crate across the wharf to the abandoned warehouse. Tyrion used a small pry bar to force the door's lock. Inside, dust motes danced in the murky light. Crates and barrels lay scattered, some empty, some rotted. Perfect for their purposes. Bronn shut the door behind them, bracing it with a plank. At last, they set the crate down in a relatively open space. Tyrion crouched, heart hammering. We're here, Ember, he whispered, sliding the lid free. The dragon peered out, blinking at the dim interior. Slowly, Ember unfurled, stepping onto the dusty floor. It stretched its wings wide, letting out a croaking hiss that reverberated through the empty warehouse. Then it shook itself, shedding flakes of dried sedation residue and weeks of cramped tension. A wave of heat radiated from its body. Tyrion bowed his head, relief welling in his throat like tears. We made it, he murmured. Ember looked at him, golden eyes bright with renewed energy. For a moment, Tyrion imagined the dragon's gaze was one of gratitude or recognition. Ridiculous, perhaps, but he felt it anyway. A bond forged through struggle and desperation. Bronn leaned against the wall, crossbow ready but relaxed. Outside, the city of Braavos teemed with life, unaware of the secret that had just stepped onto its shores. Tyrion suspected the road ahead would not be smooth. Danger would shadow them, and the challenges of concealing a growing dragon in a packed, watery metropolis would be daunting. But for now, they had this small pocket of triumph. Tyrion allowed himself a rare smile, brushing a hand across Ember's warm scales. The dragon let out a soft trill, smoke curling from its nostrils. Welcome to Braavos, Tyrion said quietly, and the words felt like the start of something new, something neither of them had ever known, a future uncoupled from the snares of Westeros, a chance to craft a different fate. And however perilous that future might be, at least they would face it together, the dwarf who had chosen hope over despair, and the dragon that should never have existed but did. In the hidden corners of a city built on illusions and dreams, they had a chance to claim a piece of freedom for themselves and maybe, just maybe, for a better world yet to come.